My edict of severance struck home. It was not a physical blow, but a conceptual one, aimed at the unstable seam of Alisara's grafted divinity. There was no explosion, no thunderous roar, just a profound, terrible silence as the gray, fueled by Harmony's truth, unraveled the core of her power. Alisara's jade eyes, which had been blazing with divine, furious light, widened in shock. The overwhelming pressure in the sanctum, her complete control, vanished in an instant, like a plug being pulled. The crimson light in her silks faded. The stolen power of lust and fantasy, now severed from the anchor of her will, dissipated like smoke. She stood motionless for a beat, a look of simple, human confusion on her face, before her knees buckled. She fell, her body hitting the cold, alien floor with a frail, mortal weight it had never seemed to possess before. The woman who had warped reality, the Crimson Empress, the Scarlet Calamity, was now nothing more than a dying ember. I stood over her, my new divine power settling into me, feeling cold and heavy. My breath was ragged in my chest. I had done it. I had won. My hand, the one that delivered the conceptual strike, trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the sickening, agonizing finality of the act. I told you, didn't I? Alisara's voice, now weak, human, rasped from the floor. You surpassed me, she confirmed, her breath shallow but steady. A trickle of blood, dark and real, escaped her lips. I knelt beside her, my mind a storm of conflicting triumph and a grief so profound it threatened to drown me. And then, before I could react, her hand, weak but impossibly fast, shot out and gripped the front of my collar, pulling me down with a final, desperate surge of strength. We fell together, me catching myself over her, her body now frail beneath mine, her chest rising and falling in shallow, painful rasps. But you can't kill me, can you? Alisara whispered, a sad, terrible amusement curling at the edges of her lips, her voice a ragged breath against my cheek. She saw the hesitation, the horror in my eyes. I didn't respond, couldn't. My breath was heavy, choking me. My limbs trembled, not from the fight, but from this, from what I'd done, from who she was. She was beneath me, her chest rising and falling just a hair's breadth from mine. I could see everything, the profound exhaustion in her jade eyes, the delicate, frantic flutter of her pulse at her throat, the stubborn, defiant pride that had never quite left her expression. Even in her final, weakest moment, she refused to look small. She was my enemy, humanity's enemy, the divine threat, stronger than demon lords, the one who had to die. I had to kill her. My hand, still humming with the cold, quiet power of my new divinity, hovered over her heart, ready to deliver the final, physical blow, to ensure it was truly over. Arthur, she said, her fingers, weak and trembling, brushing against my cheek, a gesture so small, so impossibly gentle. Yet it struck me with the force of a physical blow, threatening to undo everything. Emma, I said, the name tearing itself from my throat. It was not a question. It was not a new realization. It was an admission, a final, grieving acknowledgement of the person I had just necessarily murdered. Yes, my Arthur, she said, her voice impossibly gentle, the voice I remembered from a life before this one. Her lips, stained red from the internal backlash of her power collapsing, curled into something soft, something fond. You got so strong, she murmured. My fists clenched, crushing the cold, alien material of the floor beside her head. My fingers brushed against strands of her pink hair, as fine as silk, as achingly familiar as home. My vision blurred. I am proud of you, Arthur, she said. Then, her voice hardened, a final echo of her desperate, controlling will. Stab me. It was not a plea. It was not a request. It was a command. I can't be saved, she continued, her voice resolute though fragile. The stolen power, it's unbound. It's consuming me anyway. Can't love you properly. Not like this. Kill me. Don't say that, Emma, I whispered, hating the weak, broken sound of my own voice. Alisara, Emma, chuckled, a wet, rattling sound, and for a fleeting, impossible moment, she was the girl I had loved before all of this, before regressions, before war, before betrayal, before the crushing weight of worlds had settled onto our shoulders. You're still the weak, kind boy I loved, she said, her voice cracking. I'm sorry. We couldn't find our happiness in our past life. That was all my fault, I admitted, the confession torn from my gut. I wasn't strong enough. Not then. But you are strong enough now, she said, her eyes holding mine, filled with a painful, final clarity. I looked at her, really looked at her, and finally realized my cheeks were wet. A single drop of water, my tear, fell onto her face, mingling with the blood at the corner of her mouth. Kill me, she said again, her voice a fragile breath. I had to kill her. I had killed her. She was just dying too slowly. The first girl I had ever loved. The girl who had been my light, my hope, in a world long since turned to ash. Only then would this truly be over. Only then would my future, my real family, be safe. In the end, Alisara whispered, her free hand coming up, her forehead pressing weakly against mine, a gesture of impossible, agonizing intimacy. I am just so sorry. I couldn't be by your side, Arthur. Then her lips parted. She gasped a small, sharp intake of air. Her jade eyes, which had held mine, widened for a second, then softened, losing their divine light, their focus, their very life. And we kissed. Or perhaps, her lips simply met mine as her last bit of strength failed. A final, accidental touch of impossible intimacy. She held me, tight, or as tight as her fading strength allowed, a final, reflexive grasp. For one single, agonizing heartbeat, I could believe we were somewhere else, somewhere untouched by war and duty and blood, somewhere we could have been happy. Then her grip loosened, her hand slid from my collar. Her strength, her life, her very presence, faded completely. Emma, I said, my voice thick, though I already knew. Emma, I said again, a hollow question to the silence, despite knowing the answer. I laid her down gently, my hands cradling her head. She was smiling, even now, even in the end. And so, the day came when the Crimson Empress, the Scarlet Calamity, Alisara Velcroix, died. And I was the one who killed her. I remained there for a long time, kneeling over her body, the silence of the sanctum absolute. The weight of my new divinity felt cold and heavy, a victory that tasted only of ash. I had done it. I had surpassed OG Arthur. I had become divine. I had defeated one of the universe's most powerful beings. And I had never felt more broken. Slowly, deliberately, I closed her eyes, giving her a peace in death she could never find in her obsessive, tormented life. I looked at her face, the face of Emma, for one last time. Thank you, Emma, I thought, the single quote of final, quiet farewell, a eulogy spoken only in my soul, for the happiness we almost had, for the memory that, in the end, reminded me of what was real. I had to let her go, not just her body, but the ghost I had carried for 2 lifetimes. My past was a tragedy, but my present was waiting. Stella, Luna, Cecilia, Rachel, Serafina, Rose, Reka, they were my reality now. They were the ones I had done this for. With a final, weary breath, I stood up, my new divine power settling into my limbs, cold and certain. I turned my back on the body of the first girl I ever loved, and on the ghost of the man I used to be. The past was behind me, finally and truly. The gray seam tore open in the cold, alien architecture of Alisara's sanctum, a stable, quiet assertion of my will against a reality that no longer had a master. On the other side, I could sense the familiar, anxious, thrumming energy of the Kagu ancestral estate, the place I had designated as home for this entire, desperate operation. I took one last, long look at the still, silent form on the floor, at the face of Emma, now peaceful in death, her tortured existence finally over. I deliberately sealed that memory, that lifetime of pain and grief, away. I had made my choice in that final, agonizing moment. The past was settled. It was done. Now, there was only the cold, heavy, and unfamiliar weight of my new divinity, and an exhaustion so profound it felt as if it had settled into my very bones, into my soul. I stepped through the portal. The transition was instantaneous, jarring. The sterile, oppressive silence of Alisara's sanctum, with its lingering scent of corrupted roses and ozone, vanished. It was replaced by the crisp, cold mountain air of the Kagu Valley, alive with sound, the high-pitched hum of active energy shields, the frantic clatter of data slates, and the low, urgent murmur of dozens of voices. I materialized in the center of the vast courtyard, precisely on the prearranged coordinates. The entire team was there, a constellation of power and anxiety, gathered around the central holographic display which was, I noted distantly, still showing static-filled feeds from the battle zone I had just left. Alice and Tiamat's imposing projection stood near the center, twin pillars of ancient power. Lucifer and Ren, their own peak radiant auras churning with restless, coiled energy, flanked the display like sentinels. And my 6 fiancées, Rachel, Seraphina, Cecilia, Rose, Reika, and Luna stood together, a tight, nervous cluster, their eyes fixed on the display, waiting for a sign, any sign. The moment the gray seam tore open, every head snapped in my direction. All sounds stopped. The frantic tapping, the low murmurs, the hum of the hollow display, everything ceased. They just stared. I must have been a sight, still covered in the conceptual residue of the battle, my clothes torn and stained from the earlier phases of the confrontation, the faint, cloying scent of Alisara's power still clinging to me like a shroud. But it was not my disheveled appearance that held them captive in that single, breathless, frozen moment. It was my presence. I was no longer just Arthur, their partner, their leader, the peak radiant. The internal, agonizing forge of the battle, the shattering of my self-imposed limits, the breakthrough, the final, brutal severance. It had changed me, fundamentally, irrevocably. My power, my new gray divinity, was no longer a weapon I wielded, but a state of being I was. It radiated from me, not as a flaring, intimidating aura, but as a quiet, crushing, undeniable weight. It was the presence of objective, fundamental truth, a silent assertion that the very laws of physics in my immediate vicinity were stricter, more absolute, more real. The air itself seemed to part around me, to acknowledge my authority. Lucifer and Ren, as peak radiance, felt it most acutely. I saw their eyes widen, their stances shift from ready to wary. They were not just seeing more power. They were perceiving a qualitative shift, a new, alien layer of reality they couldn't instinctively comprehend. It was the difference between a hurricane, which they could fight, and gravity itself, which they could only obey. To my fiancés, the perception was different, more personal, more terrifyingly vast. I saw it in their faces. Rachel's analytical mind was visibly stalling, her expression frozen in disbelief, her brain unable to categorize the data I was presenting. Seraphina's glacial calm, her own mastery of stillness, seemed to recoil, recognizing a coldness far deeper and more absolute than her own. Cecilia's iron composure, her regal authority, faltered, her eyes wide with a new, unsettling vulnerability, the look of a monarch suddenly confronted by a true god. Rose's hand flew to her mouth, her life sense overwhelmed, not by a threat, but by the sheer, unfeeling density of my new presence. Reika's hand instinctively gripped her sword, a warrior recognizing a power far beyond any known combat scale. And Luna, her golden eyes were wide, her connection to fate perhaps blinded, seeing not a path, but an immovable object that now cast its own shadow over the future. Alice and Tiamat alone seemed to understand. Tiamat's draconic projection inclined its massive head, a gesture of profound, solemn respect, acknowledging a new peer. Alice simply closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, the faintest, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaping her lips. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my mind still processing the echoes of the final, agonizing moment of the kill. I simply nodded once. It was enough. It's done, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was deeper, quieter than I remembered, yet it carried across the vast courtyard with no effort, cutting through the high-pitched hum of the shields with absolute clarity. She's gone. Alisara is dead. For one agonizing heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The world held its breath, processing the impossible. Then the dam broke. It was not a gasp. It was an eruption. Lucifer was the first, throwing his head back and letting out a raw, whooping roar of pure, unadulterated triumph that echoed off the mountains. Yes, he bellowed, slamming his fist onto the console, making the holographic display flicker violently. He actually did it. Rinkagu, the man of impossible serenity, actually staggered back a step, a look of profound, dazed shock on his face that slowly, incredibly, broke into a wide, brilliant, unguarded grin. The sound that tore from Rachel's throat was a high-pitched scream, half sob, half laugh, as 2 years of compressed terror and anxiety exploded out of her. "Oh gods, Arthur!" she cried, tears of pure, hysterical relief flooding her face as she launched herself forward. Her impact was what broke the spell for everyone else. She crashed into my chest, her arms locking around my neck with a desperate, clinging strength. In an instant, I was engulfed. Serafina was beside her, her own arms locking around my waist from the side, her icy composure completely gone, her face buried in my shoulder, her body trembling. Cecilia, the crown princess, abandoned all pretense of dignity, her arms wrapping around me, her choked, gasping sobs muffled against my other side. Rose and Reka surged in, one gripping my arm as if she would never let go, tears streaming down her face, the other pressing her face into my back, her disciplined control finally shattering in a series of quiet, racking sobs. Luna was the last, her hands coming up to frame my face, forcing me to look at her, her golden eyes shining with an impossible light, her own laugh bubbling up, a sound of pure, cosmic relief. "You did it," she whispered, her thumbs brushing my cheeks. "You're divine. You actually did it." I was surrounded, anchored, held fast by the very reality I had chosen to protect. The physical contact a sudden, overwhelming, grounding shock after the cold, conceptual isolation of the final battle. I was buried in a tangle of limbs, of tears, of relieved, joyous, near-hysterical laughter. Lucifer was there, clapping me on the back with enough force to stagger a building. Rin gripped my shoulder, his grin unwavering, speechless but conveying everything. I stood in the center of them all, the sheer, crushing, alien weight of my new divinity, the exhaustion that went soul deep, the distant, sharp echo of Emma's final, smiling gaze. All of it was suddenly anchored, held steady, kept from sweeping me away by the sheer, overwhelming, real joy of my family. I didn't collapse. I stood firm, supported by them. Rose pulled back just enough, her hand pressing flat against my chest over my heart. Her life sense, now amplified by her own peak radiant power, reading me. She didn't feel a fresh, gaping wound. She felt the scar, faint, deep, and already sealed. She felt the absence of the obsessive, gnawing turmoil that had haunted me, the ghost of Emma that Alisara represented. It was gone. I was whole. She met my eyes, her own filled with a profound, knowing, absolute relief, and she smiled, a true radiant smile. I was free. A raw, ragged breath shuddered out of me then, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob of impossible relief. I was not breaking down from grief. I had made my peace. I was simply, finally, letting go of the crushing, world-ending tension, the isolation of the battle, the sheer, inhuman weight of my transformation. I buried my face in Rachel's hair, my shoulders shaking, my arms tightening around the women who anchored me, holding on to them as if I were the one drowning in relief. I was divine. I was victorious. The past was, at last, truly behind me, and I was finally home. The next morning, the Kagu ancestral estate was a hive of activity. The immediate, explosive relief of my return had given way to the grim, necessary logistics of a post-war reality. The Red Chalice cult, though leaderless, was not entirely gone. Lyra's brother, now rescued, required debriefing and care. The 7 demon lords, now unchecked, were a looming, existential threat that Tiamat and Luna were already beginning to analyze with new urgency. I sat through the initial strategic meetings, my new divine presence a heavy, anchoring weight in the room. I gave my report. I listened as Cecilia, Alastair, and Ren formulated the initial containment and intel gathering plans. I felt the weight of their stares, the new, subtle distance my transformation had created. They were my family, my partners, but I was also now something other. After hours of this, Alice met my gaze from across the table. She saw the exhaustion beneath the divinity, the need to reconnect with the reason I fought, not just the methods. She gave a single, subtle nod. "Go," she said, her voice quiet but carrying, silencing the room. "Be with your daughter. We can handle this for today." I didn't need to be told twice. I gave her a look of profound gratitude, nodded to the others, and without a word, tore a clean gray seam through the air. The cold, high-altitude air of the Kagu estate vanished, replaced instantly by the familiar, comforting quiet of my Avalon penthouse. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the comfortable, lived-in space that felt more like home than anywhere else. The faint, sharp scent of ozone and solder hung in the air, a sign that my daughter was, as always, hard at work. I found her in her workshop, the room now a sprawling testament to her genius, overflowing with components, holographic schematics, and half-assembled prototypes. She was 15 now, taller, leaner, her dark hair pulled back in a messy, practical ponytail, wearing an oil-stained jumpsuit. She was hunched over an intricate assembly, goggles pushed up onto her forehead, the tip of her tongue sticking out in concentration. She hadn't seen me during the brief, chaotic return at the Kagu estate. She had been secured elsewhere as planned. This was our first moment. I leaned against the doorframe, just watching her for a long moment, letting the simple, grounding act of observing her work, her focus, begin to unravel the tight, cold knot of divinity and grief still coiled in my chest. The memory of our last meeting, the farewell before the battle, felt like a lifetime ago. I had made her a promise, and I had returned. She must have sensed me, some subtle shift in the air, or perhaps my new divine presence was a hum she couldn't ignore. She didn't startle, but simply finished the delicate connection she was soldering with a surgeon's steady hand. She powered down the iron, set it carefully in its cradle, and slowly, almost hesitantly, swiveled on her stool to face me. Her eyes, so much like my own, scanned me. They took in the lingering traces of the battle, the torn clothes, the profound exhaustion. But they also saw what the others had seen, the change, the new settled weight, the stillness, the fundamental shift in my being. Her gaze was sharp, analytical, but beneath it, I saw a question, a fragile hope. "Daddy?" she whispered, the words small, uncertain. "I'm home, little star," I said, my voice rougher than I'd intended. That was all it took. The composure of the 15-year-old genius shattered. Her face crumpled, and a raw, relieved sob tore from her throat. She launched herself off the stool and ran, crashing into my chest with a force that, for the first time, almost felt like it could move me. I wrapped my arms around her, lifting her off the ground, burying my face in her hair, holding on to her as if she were the single, solid point in a universe of chaos. She was my anchor. "You're okay?" She sobbed into my shoulder, her small body trembling with the release of 2 years of suppressed fear, culminating in the terror of the last few days. "You're okay. You're here. You came back." "I'm here, Stell," I whispered, holding her tight, letting her familiar, real presence chase away the last, cold echoes of the sanctum, the lingering ghost of Emma. "It's over. She's gone. I promised, didn't I?" We spent the rest of the day together, a necessary, grounding return to normalcy. I consciously, deliberately, set aside the new, vast power thrumming within me. I set aside the complex understanding of ten-circle magic, the weight of sword sovereignty, the looming threat of the demon lords. Today I was not divine. I was just Dad. We didn't talk about the fight. We didn't talk about Alisara. I simply sat cross-legged on the floor of her workshop, a silent, attentive audience of one, while she, buzzing with a renewed, vibrant energy now that her fear was gone, explained her latest breakthrough. "See," she said, her hands flying, pointing to a complex holographic schematic. The problem with the kinetic driver wasn't the substrate, it was the harmonic resonance cascade. But my friends at Slatemark Academy, she mentioned them with a familiar, fond exasperation. They kept trying to solve it with rune-based dampeners, so I built a non-magical conceptual buffer using layered, phase-shifting alloys. I just listened. I let her brilliant, logical, real world wash over me, cleansing the psychic residue of the battle. I handed her tools. I held components steady. I grounded myself in the tangible, objective physics of her universe, a universe where rules were constant, where fantasy couldn't rewrite the laws of thermodynamics. At some point, Reika appeared silently in the doorway, a tray in her hands. She didn't speak, just gave me a small, soft smile of understanding before setting down 2 plates of food and 2 glasses of water, then vanished as quietly as she'd come. Stella and I ate on the floor, surrounded by her projects, arguing about the questionable plot twists in her favorite holo-series. She was 15, a burgeoning genius, a minor celebrity in the circles that mattered, and completely unfazed by the fact her father had just returned from killing a god. She was just Stella. As evening fell, casting long, peaceful shadows into the cluttered workshop, her energy finally flagged. A massive, jaw-cracking yawn caught her mid-sentence. "Come on," I said, my voice finally feeling like my own again. "Break time." We migrated to the living room sofa. I collapsed into the cushions, the sheer, profound weight of the last 2 years, culminating in the battle and my own transformation, finally settling into my bones. Stella grabbed a blanket, climbed onto the sofa next to me, and curled up, her head resting on my shoulder. A simple, comfortable hollow comedy played on the wall, its soundtrack a meaningless, soothing noise. I looked down at her head, at the dark hair, the fierce intelligence now dormant in sleep. This was it. The reason, the purpose, distilled to its purest form. Not abstract concepts of duty or heroism, but this specific, brilliant, stubborn girl, and the future she deserved to build in a world free from the shadows that haunted us. The war wasn't over. I knew that. The 7 demon lords were still out there. The Overlord was a looming, final threat. But for today, this one battle was won. I let my eyes close, the crushing, alien weight of my new divinity finally settling, becoming not a weapon to be wielded, but a quiet, steady shield to protect this. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to truly, completely rest. I woke on the sofa, the first light of a new day filtering through the penthouse windows. The heavy blanket was pooled around my waist, and my neck was stiff from the awkward angle. For a long, disorienting moment, I was adrift, the cold, alien silence of Alisara's sanctum feeling more real than the soft cushions beneath me. The sheer, crushing weight of my new divinity felt like a physical restraint. Then, I heard the soft, steady breathing beside me. Stella was still fast asleep, curled up in the small space between me and the back of the sofa, her dark hair splayed across the cushion. She had, at some point, stolen most of the blanket. A small, involuntary smile touched my lips. The crushing weight of the divine receded, pushed back by the simple, undeniable reality of my daughter drooling slightly on my shirt. This was the anchor. This was real. I stayed still for a long time, just watching the sunlight slowly crawl across the floor, listening to her sleep. The day before had been a necessary, heavy fog of re-entry, of sleep, of just being. But now the sun was up, The world, the one I had just fought to protect, was moving on. Stella stirred, her nose wrinkling before her eyes slowly opened. They focused on my face, inches from hers, and widened in momentary, sleep-dazed confusion, followed by a flicker of embarrassment. "You're drooling?" I murmured, my voice still rough. "Shut up," she mumbled, scrubbing her face with the sleeve of her jumpsuit and pushing herself upright, her hair a chaotic mess. "You snore, like a malfunctioning generator." "I do not." "You do," she insisted, but the familiar, light-hearted bickering was a balm, a return to the normalcy I craved more than anything. She stretched, her joints popping, and then looked at me, her gaze sharpening, the genius analyst replacing the sleepy teenager. "So," she said, her voice quiet, "you're back. It's done." "It's done," I confirmed. "Okay." She nodded once, absorbing the immense finality of that statement. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see her perceptive mind working, sensing the change in me, the new weight, the exhaustion that went deeper than just a bad night's sleep on a sofa. "So what now? Do you go back to the Kagu place? More meetings? Plan for the next apocalypse?" I thought of the impending debriefs, the strategic planning for the 7 demon lords, the political fallout, the sheer, crushing work that my new status demanded. I felt a sudden, profound weariness. "No," I said, making the decision in that instant. "Not today. Today, I'm taking a day off. And so are you." Stella blinked. "A day off? From what?" "I'm homeschooled, Dad. My schedule is my own." "And you just got back from?" She waved a hand vaguely, encompassing killing a god. "Exactly," I said, standing and stretching, my own body aching in protest. "I'm tired of this penthouse. You must be, too. Let's go see the city. Just us. No heroes, no geniuses. Just a dad and his daughter." Her eyes lit up, a rare, uncomplicated spark of excitement, before the practicality of her nature took over. "Go out? Like out? Dad, you're the second hero. I'm me. We can't walk 2 blocks in Avalon before we're swarmed. It's a logistical nightmare. And she eyed my face. I just saved the world vibe is kind of obvious." "I have a plan for that," I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. I went to a secure drawer, one Alastair had stocked for me ages ago. I pulled out 2 small, metallic discs, high-tech glamour emitters. Not the cheap, flickering illusions, but advanced, perception-warping tech that didn't just change your appearance, but made you uninteresting to the casual observer. "We're going in disguise," I said. An hour later, 2 completely unremarkable citizens stepped out of the penthouse's private elevator into the bustling lobby of Avalon's most exclusive tower. The man had slightly shorter, sandy brown hair and plain, dark eyes, dressed in a simple, worn jacket and jeans. The teenage girl beside him had her hair dyed a temporary, rebellious shade of dark blue, her genius-level eyes hidden behind fashionable, non-prescription glasses, a baggy Slate Mark Academy hoodie, no doubt acquired from one of her friends, swallowing her frame. The doorman didn't even glance at us as we passed. The glamour worked perfectly. The moment we hit the street, the life of the city washed over me. The rush of hover traffic overhead, the chatter of hundreds of people, the smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor, and the faint, clean scent of the city's atmospheric scrubbers. After the sterile silence of the Crucible and the alien wrongness of Alisara's sanctum, these simple, chaotic sensations felt overwhelming, vibrant, and beautiful. Stella, too, seemed to drink it in, her head on a swivel. "This is weird," she murmured, staying close to my side. "Nobody is looking at us. I kind of like it." "First stop," I said, "is a tactical necessity." "What? A strategic vantage point? Reconnaissance?" "No," I said, pointing across the street to a vendor operating a steaming, sizzling cart. "I'm starving, and I'm not eating another nutrient bar for at least a week." We got spicy synth lamb skewers, dripping with a sauce that was probably hazardously hot, and ate them standing on the crowded sidewalk, leaning against the wall. They were delicious. I watched Stella happily burn her mouth, her eyes watering, and felt a profound, simple joy. This was it. This was the peace I had fought for. So, she said, fanning her mouth. Where to? Not Dad? Slatemark campus is just 3 blocks east. Want to go see where my friends pretend to study magic? Lead the way. Not Stella, I replied. We walked, just 2 more anonymous faces in the afternoon crowd. Stella pointed out the Slatemark Academy from the outside, a soaring tower of white marble and glowing blue runes. She talked animatedly about her friends, about the projects they were collaborating on, the debates they had over physics versus magic. It made her world, the one she'd built for herself outside the penthouse, feel more real, more tangible to me. Okay, she said, finishing her skewer and tossing the stick into a recycler. My turn to choose the next stop. And you can't say no. That sounds dangerous, I said. It is, she grinned, grabbing my sleeve and pulling me down a side street. We're going to the arcade. The arcade was a cacophony of light, sound, and adolescent energy. Holographic displays flickered, simulated gunfire and roaring engines echoed off the walls, and the air smelled of floor sealant and ionized particles. It was, in a word, perfect. You're going down, Stella declared, dragging me toward a massive, immersive racing sim. Synth Racer 5000. Last one to the finish line buys the synth ice. You realize who you're talking to, right? I said with a mock-serious tone. Peak. Well, my reflexes are pretty good. Yeah. Save it for the Demon Lord's old man, she shot back, climbing into the cockpit. Let's see you handle a hairpin turn at Mach 2. What followed was, perhaps, the most humiliating defeat of my entire life. My divine-level perception, my microsecond reaction times, my ability to process complex battlefield data. None of it mattered. The game's controls felt alien, non-intuitive. I crashed into the first wall. I crashed into the second. Stella, on the other hand, drove like a seasoned professional, her genius mind instantly calculating the ridiculous physics of the game, her fingers a blur on the controls. She lapped me, twice. I emerged from the cockpit to the sound of her triumphant, howling laughter. You are so bad, she gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. The controls were unresponsive, I grumbled, but I was smiling. Seeing her this happy, this carefree, it was worth the loss. She proceeded to utterly destroy me at a light gun shooter. Your aim is terrible. How did you even win? And a complex holographic dance game where my attempts to follow the patterns were, according to her, physically painful to watch. I was the divine protector of this world, a being who had just stared down a god, and I was being mercilessly humbled by a 15-year-old in a video game arcade. It was perfect. As the sun began to set, painting the Avalon sky in hues of deep orange and violet, we found ourselves on a high-level parkway. Synth ice in hand, I paid. We sat on a bench overlooking the glittering cityscape, the noise of the traffic a distant hum. Holographic birds soared through the air, and the park's floating lanterns began to ignite, casting a soft, warm glow. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the light-hearted energy of the arcade fading into a quiet contentment. This was good, Dad, Stella said finally, her voice soft. Thanks for not being a universe-ending cosmic entity today. Just, Dad. I needed this, I said, my voice equally quiet. More than you know. I looked out at the city, at the millions of lights, the millions of lives, all moving, unaware of the battle I had just fought for them. I thought of Alisara, of the agonizing, necessary choice. I thought of Emma. The grief was still there, a thin, clean scar, but it no longer ached. The past was settled. This, sitting next to my daughter who was complaining about brain freeze, this was the present. This was the reality I had chosen. We walked home slowly as the city lights brightened against the twilight, just 2 more people in the evening crowd, our glamour discs holding steady. When the penthouse door sealed behind us, the comfortable silence of our home felt different. No longer a sterile, tense waiting room, but a place of earned peace. So, Stella said, stretching, a content-weary smile on her face. Same time tomorrow? We'll see, I said, smiling back. You still have to finish your paper on quantum fluid dynamics for your slate mark group. She groaned dramatically and trudged off toward her workshop, but I could see the lightness in her step. She was okay. We were okay. If you apply a variable state mana filter to the primary array, you're just wasting energy on heat conversion. It's a fundamentally flawed design. You have to stabilize the input before it hits the matrix, not try to clean it up after. I kept my mouth shut, of course, and just sipped my overly sweet, synthesized berry smoothie. It was a rule I'd made for myself. Never, ever give unsolicited engineering advice to Magic users, especially when they're your friends. It just makes things awkward. But why is it flawed? Corinne Vane pressed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She tapped her data slate, bringing up a complex, shimmering rune sequence. Professor Valerius said the variable state filter is the most efficient way to handle chaotic mana influx at the yellow rank. It's theoretically sound. Kalen Valerius, whose family crest was probably worth more than this entire cafe block, scoffed. That's theory. In practice, he emphasized the word, as if it were a new concept he'd just invented. My aura control is stable enough that I don't even need a filter. It's about discipline. My father, the Marquis, always says that reliance on magical constructs is a crutch for a weak will. I had to physically stop myself from rolling my eyes so hard they fell out of my head. Kalen was the one silver rank in our little study group, and he never let us forget it. He was also, in my humble, non-magical opinion, a complete idiot. His stable aura was just brute force, like using a sledgehammer to drive a nail. He was leaking so much ambient energy, he probably charged the cell phones of everyone within a 10-foot radius. It's not a crutch if it improves efficiency, Kalen. Corinne shot back, her cheeks flushing. That's the point of magical engineering. Ryan, the quiet one, just shrugged and took another bite of his pastry, his eyes glancing around the cafe. He was the only one who seemed to appreciate that we were, in fact, supposed to be relaxing. This was my hangout. My one afternoon a week where I got to pretend to be a normal 15-year-old. My friends, Corinne, Kalen, and Ryan, were all first years at Slatemark Academy, the second-best magic school in the world. They were all talented, all from high-ranking noble or influential families, and all, at this very moment, arguing about something I found fundamentally boring. I'm homeschooled, for obvious reasons. 1, I'm a celebrity, which is just a polite word for target or walking spectacle. 2, and most importantly, I can't use a drop of mana. I have zero affinity. My aura is just me. In a world defined by magical ranks, yellow, silver, radiant, I am a null, which, in my opinion, just means I have to try harder. My lab back at the penthouse is more advanced than half the facilities at Slatemark, and my kinetic driver prototypes could outperform any of Kalen's disciplined energy blasts. Not that I'd ever say that out loud. What do you think, Stella? Corinne asked, turning to me, her eyes pleading for a tiebreaker. I think, I said, swirling the last of my smoothie, that if your core problem is a chaotic influx, you should be reinforcing the initial containment array, not fixing the symptoms with a filter. It's bad design. Kalen opened his mouth, probably to tell me that bad design was a bit rich coming from someone who couldn't even light a simple mage light, but he never got the chance. The entire cafe, which had been buzzing with the chatter of off-duty students and business professionals, went utterly silent. It wasn't a gradual hushing. It was instantaneous, as if someone had hit a universal mute button. The clinking of cups, the low murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, all of it stopped. I felt a familiar, sinking feeling in my gut. Oh no, please no. He said 4 o'clock. It's 3:45. I turned my head slowly toward the door, and there he was, my dad, Arthur Nightingale, the second hero, the most powerful and, according to every holo magazine on the planet, the most eligible man in the world. He was dressed in a simple, worn jacket and jeans, nothing at all like the armor he wore in the news feeds, but it didn't matter. He could have been wearing a clown suit. When he walked into a room, the air changed. It wasn't just his power, which he kept so tightly leashed it was barely a hum. It was his presence. The entire cafe full of talented, magically gifted nobles and students was collectively holding its breath, staring at him like he was a living god. Which I guess he kind of was. My face felt like it was on fire. I simultaneously wanted to slide under the table and beam with pride. He scanned the room, his eyes missing nothing, before they landed on our table. His face, which had been calm, neutral, and maybe a little weary, instantly broke into a warm, utterly normal dad smile. This somehow was the most mortifying part of all. He walked over, his footsteps the only sound in the dead-silent cafe. "Hey, little star," he said, his voice full of that quiet warmth that always made me feel safe. Then he did it. He reached out and ruffled my hair, my carefully, deliberately arranged hair. "Kill me," I thought, my soul exiting my body. "Just strike me down right here, in front of Kalen Valerius. I will die." "Dad," I hissed, swatting his hand away, my face now a supernova of embarrassment. "You're early. And my hair." "Sorry, sweetheart," he chuckled, completely unbothered. My meeting finished early. Figured I'd grab you. Are you ready to go? Reka's making your favorite stir-fry tonight." He was treating me like I was 9, in front of my friends. I wanted to disintegrate. Then he turned his attention to the 3 people at my table, who had apparently forgotten how to breathe. "You must be her study group," he said, his smile polite and easy. Kalen, the arrogant silver rank noble whose father was a marquis, made a small, choking sound. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over in the process. "Lord Nightingale." "Sir," he stammered, his face pale. It is an honor, sir. Profound honor. My father, the Marquis Valerius, he says your analysis of the Eastern Campaign was... It was brilliant, sir." Corinne, usually so articulate, just stared, her face bright crimson. She looked like she was physically incapable of forming a word, and just gave a tiny, spastic little wave. Ryan, to his credit, just looked completely, totally awestruck, his eyes wide as dinner plates. This was the part one loved, the part one hated. I was dying of second-hand embarrassment, but at the same time, a fierce, glowing pride swelled in my chest. These kids, the best Slatemark had to offer, future leaders and mages from the most powerful families, were reduced to stammering, blushing messes in his presence. And he was just my dad, the guy who snored, the guy who was terrible at video games, the guy who called me Little Star. My dad smiled, a genuinely kind, disarming expression that seemed to put them slightly at ease. "Stella's the real genius here," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I'm just the muscle. Make sure you all keep her in line. She gets single-minded with her projects." "Dad, I am right here," I protested, shoving his hand off, but I was smiling now. I couldn't help it. "A pleasure to meet you all," he said to them, giving a small nod. "Keep up the good work. The world needs bright minds like yours." "Yes, sir. Thank you, Lord Nightingale," Kalen blurted out, still standing at rigid attention. I finished the last of my smoothie and gathered my data slates, my face still burning but my heart full. "Okay, I'm ready," I grumbled. Dad put his arm around my shoulder, pulling me into a tight, one-armed hug as we walked towards the door. The entire cafe watched us go. "So," he murmured, his voice low just for me, "that silver rank kid, Kalen, he looked like he was about to faint. You're not giving him too much trouble, are you?" "Oh my God, Dad, you were so embarrassing," I muttered, but I couldn't stop the grin from spreading across my face, and I leaned my head against his shoulder for just a second. He was my dad, and he was, without a doubt, the coolest person on the planet, even if he did snore. I looked at Stella, who had leaned her head against my shoulder for just a second in the cafe. A small, fleeting gesture of affection before the world snapped back into focus. Space warped around me, the familiar, effortless fold of the gray, and an instant later, we stood in the quiet, sunlit living room of the penthouse. The transition was seamless, the hustle of the Avalon Street vanishing as if it had never been. "You're embarrassed?" I chuckled, releasing her. The warmth of the one-armed hug lingered, a brief moment of normal father-daughter contact. "Because of that Kalen kid?" "It's not like that," she sighed, pulling away, her face still a little pink as she walked over to the massive window, her favorite spot. She stared out at the Avalon skyline, a glittering expanse of white towers and blue sky. He's rank 1 of Slatemark Academy's first years. Silver rank. And everyone else in the group is yellow. They're all so driven. I just want to make sure I can keep up, you know?" My smile stalled, fading instantly. I saw it then, the deep, persistent vulnerability she tried so hard to hide behind her sarcastic wit and her fierce, non-magical genius. She was 15, surrounded by the magically gifted elite, constantly reminded of the one thing she lacked, the one path she could not walk. It was an ache I could not heal, a gap I could not close for her, and it twisted my heart. But I could protect her. "Erebus," I said, my voice quiet but firm in the sunlit room. A spatial rift, dark and silent as a slice of the void, tore open beside me. From it stepped my second oldest companion, Erebus, his form now imposing, skeletal plates etched with glowing runes, an aura of profound, cold power thrumming around him, knelt immediately. His presence, equivalent to a low radiant, caused the very temperature in the room to drop a degree. He bowed his skull, first to me, then to a wide-eyed Stella. "Dad, I don't want to be strong like this," she protested immediately, her mind leaping to the wrong conclusion, thinking this was some misguided attempt to fix her. "This dash. Shoo." I shushed her gently, walking over to where she stood by the window. I placed my hands on her shoulders, turning her to face me. "I know. I'm not stupid. This isn't for you to keep up. This isn't a tool for your studies." I met her confused, defiant gaze. "Erebus is a guardian. Your guardian." Her protest died, replaced by wide-eyed confusion. "A guardian? But don't you need him? For, you know..." She waved a hand vaguely, encompassing the divine-level battles she knew on some level I was now fighting. I glanced at my faithful Lich King, still kneeling, silent and patient. Need him? The word felt heavy, sharp with a new, painful truth. Alisara had proven that terrible fact in her sanctum. Erebus, who had been my ultimate trump card for a decade, the ace up my sleeve, was now a liability in the face of true divine power. His radiant rank strength was formidable, capable of shattering armies, but against a being who could rewrite reality with a thought, he would be unmade in an instant, devoured. If I had summoned him in that final battle, she would have torn him apart, and it would have been my failure, my arrogance, that led to his final death. My gaze softened as I looked at the intricate bones that formed his hand. I remembered the sheer, desperate, mad gamble it had been. My first year at Mythos Academy, a silver rank, ridiculed for daring to delve into such advanced necromancy with my unusual constitution. I remember getting the unique skull of an archlich he kept locked away in his private collection that began this whole journey to making my own lich. I remembered the thrill of the hunt, tracking down the basilisk's heart in the outskirts of Nimrin City using knowledge from the saga of the Divine Swordsman. I'd spent a fortune, convincing Rose's Vokert Corporation to provide me with the flawless, 8-star skeleton of a blood wyvern they had recently acquired. Everyone thought I was insane. They called me mad, a fool playing with forces that would consume him. Yet I had succeeded. I had combined them, fueled by nothing but a desperate, burning will. I hadn't just created a lich, I'd created him. An ancient undead, a being of profound potential, bound inextricably to my soul. He had grown with me, from a simple, wearable bone armor I used to survive sparring matches, to a sentient, powerful ally who could stand with me against calamities. But now, I was divine. The gap was too vast. And upgrading him further, to a Lich Emperor, the materials required would be of a divine, near impossible quality. And even then, as my new understanding of the universal architecture confirmed, the result would only peak at the calamity level. Still too weak for the real war to come. His best, his most vital, his most honorable purpose was no longer on the battlefield at my side. It was here. "This is merely to protect you, Stella," I said finally, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "That's it. I need Erebus to be by your side. Always." Stella looked at me, then at the kneeling lich, her mind processing this immense, permanent shift in her reality. I turned to Erebus. "Erebus," I said, "what do you think?" "Your wish is my command, master," he responded simply, his voice a low, resonant echo in our minds. "That did not answer my question," I replied, my voice softening. "Answer me, Erebus, as my partner." He remained silent for a long moment, the pinpoints of purple light in his dark sockets seeming to flicker, to waver. "I wish to fight by your side, master," he admitted finally, his voice heavy with a profound, bony equivalent of sorrow. "But I am not foolish. I felt the echo of your last encounter, even from my domain. I apologize for being too weak." "Erebus," I said, stepping forward, away from Stella, and placing my hand on his cold, bony shoulder. The gesture spanned a decade of shared, impossible battles. He was my first true ally, the first being in this new world who was unequivocally mine. "You have been by my side for over 10 years. You were there when I was just a child, a white rank who created something I couldn't hope to control. You allowed me to use you as simple bone armor just to survive my academy classes." A small, nostalgic smile touched my lips. "You grew with me. You supported me in every fight, against every odd. I am grateful, beyond words, to have you as my companion. I am sorry for not being able to grow you continuously, for reaching a place where the gap between us is so vast. That is not your failure as a summon, Erebus. That is mine as your master." I met his glowing purple gaze. "I may not need you in the battles to come, but I need you. I need you to be with my daughter. I need you to protect her with all the strength, all the cunning we have honed together. That is the most important mission I will ever, or could ever, give you." Erebus's gaze shifted from me to Stella, who was watching him now not with fear, but with wide, awestruck eyes. He rose from his kneeling position, not as a servant, but as a guardian, his full, imposing height seeming to fill the room. He turned to Stella and bowed his skull, a gesture of profound, transferred loyalty. "I will protect her with my unlife, master." Stella looked between us, her earlier insecurity about keeping up with her slate-mark friends completely gone, replaced by the sober, sudden understanding of the true dangers I faced, and the priceless, powerful, and ancient guardian I was entrusting to her. She nodded slowly. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "Okay, Erebus. Welcome to the team, I guess." The rest of the day passed in a new, comfortable quiet, with Erebus standing silent and unobtrusive vigil in the corner of her lab. Invisible to all but us, Stella and I tinkered with her projects. The tension of the cafe visit, the weight of my impending departure, was forgotten, replaced by the shared focus of engineering. As evening fell, I walked her to her room. She hugged me tight at the door, her arms wrapping around my waist, her face buried in my shirt for a long moment. "Be careful, Daddy," she whispered. "Always," I promised. I watched her climb into bed, her data slate already in her hand, her mind already back to her work. I smiled and pulled the covers up, tucking her in. A simple paternal gesture that felt more real and more important than all the divine power in the universe. Erebus, from his position in the hallway, unseen, was a silent, comforting presence. My anchor was secure, protected by my oldest friend. I closed her door, leaving her to her dreams of physics. I stood in the silent, empty living room, the lights of Avalon glittering far below. Now it was time for the next step for Stella. Space warped, the familiar, quiet tear of gray folding reality around me. The scent of Stella's workshop, solder and ozone, vanished, replaced instantly by the unique, sterile tang of high grade, ozonated mana and the dry, ancient smell of parchment and preserved artifacts. I stood in a place I had not visited in far, far too long. The 200th floor of the Tower of Magic, the personal sanctum of the Tower Master. A space so heavily and intricately warded that its defensive arrays were considered a national treasure, supposedly impenetrable. You certainly make an entrance, second hero. A dry, amused voice cut through the absolute, library-like silence. From behind a massive desk that was a chaotic storm of flickering holograms, stacked data slates, and glowing arcane foci, a pair of sharp jade eyes looked up. Charlotte Alaric, her vibrant red hair a familiar, fiery cascade over her shoulders, rested her chin on her palm. She regarded me with an expression that was equal parts fond exasperation and profound, analytical awe. "I simply wanted to see you, Master," I said with a genuine smile, taking the chair opposite her without being asked. Felt familiar, comfortable. The chair, I noted with a small, nostalgic smile, still subtly adjusted its form to my posture, a feat of high-end enchanting I had once marveled at. "Master HM?" She leaned back in her own chair, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "I appreciate the sentiment, especially from a man who just bypassed several dozen layers of warding as if they were a beaded curtain." She gestured to the empty, quiet room, the massive windows showcasing a breathtaking, God's eye view of Avalon City. "And you even made sure to come when I was alone, sensing my schedule perfectly. Your perception, Arthur, is, frankly, terrifying. Just because the student surpassed their master doesn't mean the master still isn't the master." I responded easily, and I meant every word. "Master Charlotte, your lessons in spellcasting, the way you taught me to think about magic, to see it as a system, as architecture, they were invaluable. More valuable than any raw power. Yet you haven't called me master in a very long time," she said, her tone light and accusing, though her eyes twinkled with mirth. I held up my hands in mock surrender. "I have been busy, Master," I chuckled. "Wars, apocalypses, the usual. It tends to shift one's priorities." "So I've heard," she said, her smile softening. "Killing gods, I read? A bit above what I covered. It is good to see you, Arthur. Truly." Her gaze became more serious, analytical, as she, in turn, read the new, settled state of my divinity. "You've changed. Not just the power, though, my gods, that's palpable. But you feel heavier, more settled, like a mountain that's decided where it wants to sit." "It was a difficult fight," I admitted. "But it's good to see you too. And you haven't been idle." I let my own senses briefly scan her aura, the quiet, dense power circulating within her. Mid-radiant rank. That's an exceptional achievement, Master, especially while running this entire continent's magical infrastructure. She gave a small, self-deprecating sigh, waving a hand as if to brush away the compliment. "Please. Strong is relative in an age with people like you, Lucifer, and Renkagu running around. I can't keep up with you geniuses at all," she said, though her voice held no real envy, only a sort of weary, pragmatic acceptance. "My ambition to be the strongest faded a long time ago. Much like the other radiants of my generation, my attention has shifted." She tapped a hologram, and familiar images flickered past Cecilia, Clara Lopez, her own sister Kathleen. "Better to nurture the new talents. They are the future. We are just the custodians." "You've been a very good custodian, Master," I said quietly. "And speaking of the future, I've brought you something. A gift. A new curriculum for the tower." Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh? A gift? What, your Nightingale method? A bit specific for the general student body, don't you think?" "Something more fundamental," I said. I raised my hand between us. I didn't cast a spell. I simply willed it, and the architecture of magic itself became visible in the air. A complex, shimmering lattice of 9 interconnected circles of light appeared, the 9-circle system that was the foundation of all modern magic, the pinnacle of mortal understanding. Charlotte herself was one of the few mages alive capable of wielding its full power. This, I said, gesturing to the complex diagram, is what we teach. This is what we know. The 9 circles. It is the foundation of all magical theory, she agreed, her gaze watchful, curious. It's not, I said softly. It's a subset, a simplified model that works for our level of perception. But it's incomplete, flawed, even. I focused, drawing on the new, profound understanding my gray divinity had granted me. The knowledge I'd synthesized in the crucible of that final battle. I asserted a new truth. I didn't add a 10th circle, which would be divine magic, usable only by me. Instead, I reimagined the existing 9. The diagram in the air began to shift. Old, inefficient pathways dissolved. New, more elegant conceptual linkages formed between the circles. The very structure of the spells they represented, from a 1st circle mage light to a 9th circle meteor, began to rewrite themselves, becoming faster, more stable, vastly more efficient. My divine perception didn't just show me new magic, I explained, as she watched, mesmerized. It showed me the flaws in all magic. It showed me the fundamental architecture. What we've been using is like a crude, inefficient engine. This is a complete redesign. I gestured to the new, glowing framework. This is a new, generalized system for all 9 circles. It redefines the core spellcasting methods, making them more stable, more powerful, and significantly less demanding on the caster's core. It's a new foundation, based on the true laws of mana, not just the ones we were able to perceive before. Charlotte stared, her breath catching in her throat. She rose slowly from her chair, her jade eyes wide, unblinking, tracing the new, impossible pathways with a trembling finger. She, as a 9-circle wielder, understood the implications instantly. This wasn't just an update. This was a revolution. It would elevate the power of every single mage on the planet. This is not my personal magic, I clarified, letting the construct hum gently. It is not the gray. This is the generalized, universal framework. The philosophy that the Tower of Magic can research, codify, and eventually teach. It will allow us to truly understand what we're fighting, and perhaps give us a chance to build a future where others can defend themselves. Charlotte sank back into her chair, her face pale, her hands visibly shaking. She looked from the glowing, universe-altering diagram to me, her expression one of profound, world-shattering awe. You haven't just discovered new spells, Arthur? She whispered, her voice cracking slightly. You've given us a new world of magic. This changes everything. It's a gift, Master, I said, letting the construct fade, leaving her in the sudden silence. For the tower, for what's coming. Charlotte stared at the empty air where my construct of the reimagined 9 circles had glowed, her face pale, her hands visibly trembling. She, a 9-circle archmage and master of the tower, understood the implications far better than anyone else alive. I had not just given her a few new spells. I had handed her the schematics for an entirely new engine of magic, rendering millennia of established theory obsolete. She finally sank back into her chair, letting out a long, shaky breath. My gods, Arthur, she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. I will need time to process this. The tower, this will rewrite everything. It will take years to fully codify and implement. I know, I said gently, but it's a start. It's a foundation for the mages of the future to build upon, to give them a fighting chance against what is to come. She nodded, her mind clearly still reeling from the sheer scale of the gift. She took a deep, steadying drink from a nearby mug, cold coffee. By the look of it, and visibly composed herself, the pragmatic tower master slotting back into place over the awestruck mage. A gift of that magnitude, it indebts the tower, and the entire Slatemark Empire, to you in a way I cannot even begin to calculate. Her sharp jade eyes narrowed slightly, the shrewd negotiator returning. Which, I suspect, brings us to your business. You did not just come here to drop a magical revolution on my desk and chat. What is the other reason you are here, Arthur? I smiled. She always did get straight to the point. It is a smaller request, I assured her, but a personal one. I am here about another genius, one who needs a different kind of nurturing. My daughter, Stella. Charlotte's eyebrows, which had just returned to their normal position, shot right back up. Stella? She repeated, clearly surprised. Arthur, I have read all the public reports on her, and Alastair has bragged extensively in private. The girl is a certified, off-the-charts prodigy, no doubt. Her non-mana-based patents are already causing waves in every corporate R&D department on the continent. But that is the very issue, is it not? She has no mana affinity. This is the Tower of Magic. How can she possibly learn here? What could we possibly offer her, other than a very expensive library card? Her concern was genuine, her worry practical. She does not need to learn to cast, I explained, leaning forward. She needs to learn magic's principles, its physics, its limitations, its fundamental interactions with the physical world. She is already reverse engineering complex magical phenomena using only mundane science, but she's hit a wall. She is working from the outside with limited, black box data. I want her to have access to your resources, your libraries, yes, but also your labs, your brightest theoretical minds. She needs to see the systems she is trying to innovate outside of up close. She needs to understand the engine before she can build a better one. Charlotte frowned, tapping a thoughtful rhythm on her desk. The archives, certainly. The theoretical forums. That is easily granted. But the practical labs. Arthur, you must understand, this entire tower is a high-energy environment. It is saturated with raw, ambient mana, often in chaotic, fluctuating states from experiments. For a non-affinity individual, even with top-of-the-line shielding, it could be hazardous. And, to be blunt, the students here. She sighed. They are the best, but they are also ambitious, competitive, and often cruel. A non-mana user, especially the famous daughter of the second hero, would be isolated. A target for everything from simple bullying to more serious, politically motivated accidents. I've already accounted for that, I said, appreciating her candor. Both her safety and her experimental needs. I paused, then decided the direct approach was best. I have assigned my Lich King, Erebus, as her permanent guardian. Charlotte, who had been in the process of taking another sip of coffee, froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. She slowly, deliberately, set the mug down, her jade eyes wide with utter, unadulterated shock. You what? She finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Your Lich King? The ancient undead that shattered a calamity at Avalon? The being classified as low radiant? You are assigning that as a bodyguard for a first-year student. He will keep her safe, I confirmed calmly. He will remain cloaked, bonded to her at all times. He will ensure her absolute physical and magical safety from any academic rivalries or other threats. And, I added, delivering the final piece that solved her other problem. He is a radiant rank entity with a massive, perfectly stable internal power core. He can serve as a direct, external mana battery for any experiment Stella wishes to conduct, allowing her to test her theories against an active power source without ever needing an affinity of her own. Charlotte stared at me, speechless, for a full 10 seconds. Then she let out a low, breathless whistle, leaning back in her chair and running a hand through her vibrant red hair. A radiant rank guardian who also doubles as a portable, divine-level battery. My gods, Arthur. You really, truly, do not do things by halves, do you? She shook her head, a look of grudging, amazed respect on her face. That certainly handles all my technical and security objections in the most ridiculously, overwhelmingly absolute way possible. Very well. She will be safe and she will have a power source. I will grant her full access to the archives and labs up to the 180th floor, effective immediately. She can learn under my personal direction if she wishes. It would be fascinating. Thank you, master. That is all I ask. Good. She tapped her console, the business seemingly concluded in her mind. A moment of comfortable silence passed as she processed the sheer magnitude of the 2 requests I had just made. Then her expression shifted, the weariness of her station returning, but mixed with a new, different kind of planning. Now, she said, while my entire life's work is busy turning upside down, I had a question for you, a separate matter. She brought up a new file, the image of a focused, dark-haired woman appearing. Clara Lopez. I am planning to step down as Tower Master soon, she said. This job and the new, world-changing curriculum you just handed me, it is too much for one person. I am tired. I was thinking of nominating Clara as my successor. She is high radiant, disciplined, and her administrative skills are second to none. I nodded, considering the candidate. Clara is an excellent choice, I agreed honestly. Diligent, brilliant, and fair. The tower would be in good hands. I paused, my gaze turning serious, meeting hers. But I would advise you to wait, master. Hold off on the announcement. Her gaze sharpened instantly. The war. The war, I confirmed. Alisara is gone. But the 7 demon lords are still out there. The demon overlord is still a looming shadow. The real fight is just beginning. The world needs stability right now, and you, in this chair, are that stability. We cannot afford a power transition at a place this critical until the skies are truly clear. Charlotte let out a long, weary sigh, the weight of my words settling on her. The war, of course. Always another war. She leaned back, the tension seeming to drain from her, replaced by a teasing, almost mischievous light in her jade eyes, a familiar tactic of hers to bat away the gloom. Fine, fine. I will keep the dusty old chair. But you know, Clara is not even the best candidate. Not really. Oh, I asked, sensing the probe. My own niece, Charlotte said, her smile widening into a sly grin. Your fiancée, Rose. She's the best choice. She is peak radiant now, same as you were before your ascension. Her creativity, her innate, conceptual understanding of life magic, her raw power. She would be a revolutionary tower master. She is far stronger and has more raw potential than Clara. Why not push for her? Put your thumb on the scale? It would benefit your family. Benefit you. I could not help but smile, shrugging off the gentle, political jab. Rose's path is her own. She would despise this job. She is happy in her gardens, running her company, healing the world one piece at a time. I met her gaze, letting her see the simple, unvarnished truth. And you know I do not care about placing my people in positions of power. I have no interest in that kind of influence. Charlotte laughed, a genuine, warm sound that filled the ancient office. I know. That is what is so damn terrifying and so infuriating about you, Arthur. You do not try to gather power, and yet here you are. She gestured with her hands, as if encompassing the entire global stage. A divine-rank hero fresh from killing a god, allied with Lucifer and Rinkagu. And let's not forget your attachments. Her eyes twinkled as she ticked them off on her fingers. Betrothed to the crown princess of this very Slate-Mark empire. Betrothed to the saintess and second princess of the Creighton lineage. Betrothed to the Vokert heiress, who happens to be my niece. Betrothed to Marcianus Reka, a peak radiant swordmaster in her own right. Betrothed to the princess of Mount Hua sect, the most powerful force in the East. She shook her head, her smile wry. You will have the entire world in your palm soon, Arthur, whether you want it or not. I just want a quiet life, master, I said, standing up. The conversation and my business here was concluded. You know that. The quiet life is the one thing you will probably never have, Arthur, she said, her expression softening, a trace of genuine, almost sad, affection in her eyes. But good luck trying. I'll keep trying. I turned towards the empty air of her office. Let me know what Stella needs. And thank you, Charlotte, for everything. Before she could respond, I tore a clean gray seam through her meticulously crafted wards and stepped through it, leaving her alone in the sudden silence of her tower, her world, and the entire future of magic, fundamentally changed forever. Leaving Charlotte in her tower, still processing the sheer scale of the gift I'd left her, felt like closing a small, necessary chapter. The new framework for all 9 circles of magic was not my personal power. It was not the gray, nor was it the divine-level sorcery I could now access. It was a reimagining of the very foundation of spellcasting, a correction of 1,000 years of flawed, inefficient theory. Julius Slatemark had founded the Mana Core system, a brilliant, revolutionary way for mortals to gather and manage power. That was the engine, and it was a masterpiece. It didn't need to be changed. Geniuses could already optimize it for themselves, and it provided a clear path for everyone else. But the spellcasting, the 9 circles we all used, that was the transmission, and it was inefficient. It was a system built through trial and error, full of redundant code, energy leaks, and conceptual misunderstandings. My breakthrough to the divine rank, my ascension, had not just given me access to the 10th circle, the realm of divine magic itself. It had given me a top-down architectural view of the entire system, allowing me to see all its flaws. What I gave Charlotte, and by extension the Creighton family, was the optimized, rewritten, and perfected framework for all 9 mortal circles. New casting methods, new energy pathways, new conceptual anchors that were vastly more stable and powerful, yet required less energy. It was a gift designed to raise the baseline strength of all human mages, a necessary upgrade for the wars I knew were coming. I stepped from the gray seam back into the absolute quiet of my penthouse in Avalon. The lights were off. The city glittered like a sea of diamonds far below. I moved silently through the living room, the familiar, comforting scent of Stella's projects and the faint trace of Reika's presence a balm on my senses. Being divine rank was different, incomparably so. The power was not a tool I held. It was the very medium in which I now existed. I felt the change in the simplest interactions. When I had arrived at the Tower of Magic, I had not bothered to bypass the dozens of high-level wards Charlotte maintained. I had simply walked through them, and they had not triggered. They had not resisted. They had bowed. They had parted for my presence as if it were the most natural thing in the world, recognizing a higher, more fundamental authority. The world no longer argued with me. It simply agreed. I paused at Stella's bedroom door. It was cracked open slightly, and I could hear the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing. She was asleep. I felt a surge of profound, aching love, the quiet human anchor that held my new, godlike power in check. This was why. This was the reason for all of it. I walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out not at the city, but up. The night was clear, and the moon hung high and bright, a perfect, silver-white disk against the black. 400,000 kilometers. An impossible, sterile distance. Before, at peak radiant, I could not have sensed it. My perception, though vast, was terrestrial. I could feel the flow of mana in the continent, but the void of space was a wall, a silent, unbridgeable gap. But now I saw the structure. My divine perception, forged in the battle with Alisara, didn't just see the 3 dimensions of space. It perceived the higher-order layers, the spatial folds that composed reality like the pages of an infinite book. The universe was massive, yes. Our galaxy, a place we could never hope to cross physically. But that was only if you traveled on one page. When you learned to move between the layers, distance became a far more malleable concept. It was how the Slatemark warp gate to the moon functioned, folding space for near-instantaneous transit. It was how Lysandra, a being of similar power, could project her will from galaxies away, touching the mind of her subordinate. She wasn't shouting across an ocean. She was whispering through a perfectly placed pinhole, a connection utilizing these higher spatial layers. I closed my eyes. I focused. I extended my consciousness not outwards but upwards through the layers. It was not like pushing, but like unfocusing my eyes to see a different image. The strain was immediate, immense. a conceptual pressure building behind my temples as I peeled away the familiar reality of my penthouse. Layer 1, Layer 2, Layer 10. The spatial dimensions folded. The 400,000 kilometers of empty vacuum ceased to be an obstacle. In an instant, I was there. My senses, disembodied, floated over the cold, gray, silent dust of the lunar surface. I could feel the stark temperature difference between the light and the dark, the faint, lingering energy signatures of our own unmanned rovers. I expanded my senses, searching, and I found it, a faint, silver-thin latticework of energy, spread across the near side of the moon, the Aegis Luna defense system I had personally funded. It was a fragile, beautiful, intricate web of wards and detectors, designed to watch for threats approaching Earth. It was our first line of defense. And it was, I now realized with a chilling certainty, hopelessly, pathetically inadequate. I needed to see what it was supposed to be watching for. I pushed further. The strain intensified, a warning siren in my mind. This was new territory, dangerous. I ignored it. I peeled away more layers, moving my perception deeper into the spatial manifold, using the moon as a relay point to gaze out into the true, deep solar system. Beyond Mars, beyond the asteroid belt, beyond the orbits of the gas giants. I pushed my divine senses to their absolute limit, out into the cold, dark, empty void at the edge of our system, and I found them. At first, it was just a subtle wrongness, a ripple in the spatial layers that didn't belong, a discordant note in the silent music of the cosmos. Then my senses focused and the wrongness took shape. They were still impossibly far away in physical space. Years, perhaps decades, at conventional speeds. But they were not traveling at conventional speeds. They were moving through the higher spatial layers, taking the same shortcuts I was using to perceive them, and on that path they were close. I couldn't see them with light, but I could feel them. The cold, hungry otherness. The unmistakable, suffocating taint of miasma, not as a subtle corruption, but as a dominant, conquering force. It was not one. It was a fleet, a vanguard. The demon ships were incoming. The war I had been preparing for, the threat that had been an abstract, distant future. It was no longer abstract. It was a tangible, approaching reality. And it was almost here. My consciousness snapped back into my body with the jarring force of a high-G re-entry. The transition from the edge of the solar system to the Avalon penthouse was instantaneous, but the sensory whiplash was immense. My mind, which had just been stretched across billions of kilometers of void, felt compressed, the new, vast perspective of my divinity crammed back into the confines of a human skull. The strain was profound, a sharp, conceptual ache behind my eyes. I stood in the darkness of the living room, the city lights of Avalon glittering far below, oblivious. The quiet hum of the penthouse, the faint scent of Stella's slumber, felt impossibly fragile, like a whisper in the face of the hurricane I had just perceived. They were coming, a fleet, tainted with miasma, moving faster than light through the higher spatial layers, using the same pathways I had just learned to perceive. The Aegis Luna was a tripwire, and they had just crossed it. The war was no longer an abstract future. It was an imminent reality. There was no time to waste, no time for quiet processing. My family, my team needed to know. I didn't bother with a phone. I reached out, my divine will asserting itself, and tore a clean gray seam through the fabric of reality. I stepped from the moonlit penthouse directly into the brightly lit, high-alert atmosphere of the Kagu Ancestral Estate's Central Command Center. The room was a hive of focused energy. My arrival, silent and unannounced, caused a universal, jarring pause. Lucifer, Ran, and my 6 fiancés were gathered around a central holographic map, likely planning the next phase of the Red Chalice cult cleanup. Alice stood near Tiamat's imposing projection, the two of them in quiet, deep discussion. They all froze, their heads snapping in my direction, their expressions a mixture of surprise and immediate, heart-stopping alarm. My sudden, unannounced appearance, combined with the grim, cold aura I was currently radiating, told them everything they needed to know. This was not a social call. What is it? Cecilia was the first to speak, her voice sharp, the crown princess instantly taking charge of the room's sudden tension. Arthur, what did you see? I extended my senses, I said, my voice quiet, though it seemed to cut through the low hum of the command center with absolute clarity. Past the estate, past Avalon. I went to the moon to check the Aegis Luna. Luna's golden eyes widened. You reached the moon? With your senses alone. Divinity has its advantages, I said dismissively, brushing past the implication. The Aegis is functional, but it's irrelevant. They are already past it. A cold silence fell. Who is? Serafina asked, her voice like ice. A demon fleet, I stated. A vanguard, moving fast using high spatial layers. They are close. Weeks, maybe days. Not years. The reaction was immediate, visceral. Rachel's face went pale. Rose's hand flew to her mouth. Lucifer swore, his crowns flaring. That is impossible, Lyra burst out, stepping forward, her usual composed, diplomatic demeanor completely gone, replaced by shock and disbelief. As a member of the Great Seven, this was her domain, her knowledge. My people's last dispatch was clear. The 7 demon lords are all locked in a stalemate against the Great Seven's full might. We were pushing them back, especially after Lysantra's injuries crippled their command structure. And the demon overlord himself is in a direct, conceptual confrontation with God Akasha. They do not have the resources, the power, or the focus to launch a new, full-scale invasion of Earth. It is a strategic impossibility. Her words were desperate, clinging to the established facts, to the reality she knew. But I had felt the truth. Your intel is out of date, I said, my voice flat, leaving no room for argument. Or we are being deliberately deceived. I did not just sense ships, Lyra. I sensed the conceptual weight of their commanders. 2 of them, divine-level signatures. I paused, trying to find the words for the sheer wrongness of what I had felt, even from such an impossible distance. One was insidious, cold, a creeping, gnawing, profound want for what was not its own. It felt like a void, defined only by what it lacked, and the burning desire to take it. It was envy. Luna gasped, her hand gripping Rachel's arm. The other, I continued, was simpler, far simpler. It was pure, unadulterated, focused rage. A boundless, screaming, incandescent fury directed at, well, at everything. A mindless, world-ending tantrum given divine form. Felt like wrath. Lyra staggered back, her face ashen, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror that surpassed her earlier disbelief. No, it cannot be. Envy and wrath? Together. What does it mean, Lyra? Cecilia demanded, her voice sharp, sensing the shift from disbelief to terror. Lyra looked at me, her gaze filled with a terrible, new understanding. The hierarchy of the demon lords. It's not a simple council of equals. There is a ranking, an order of power. She took a shaky breath. Lysandra, Lust, the one you killed, Arthur. She was the second strongest. And these 2, oppressed. Wrath, she said, her voice trembling, is the 3rd strongest, a being of pure catastrophic force. But envy. She shook her head, as if denying her own words. Envy is not just a demon lord. Envy is the first, the strongest of the 7, the most cunning, the most powerful, the one who whispers in the shadows and pulls the strings of the entire abyssal hierarchy. The room fell silent again, the implications settling like a layer of thick, choking dust. Not only had a fleet broken free, but it was being led by the 1st and 3rd most powerful demon lords. They have abandoned their battle with the Great Seven, Alice stated, her voice a chillingly calm monotone, piecing it all together. Or they won. Regardless, they have disengaged. And they are coming here. It's not just them, I added, my mind replaying the sensory data. The fleet itself is massive. I couldn't get an exact count, but I sensed the honor guard around those 2 primary signatures. I met the eyes of my team, 4 demon archdukes, 2 of them at peak radiant rank, 2 at high radiant. And beyond them, numerous doesn't even begin to cover it. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of demon dukes, all at the radiant rank. I also noted the ships themselves. Their technology, I said, glancing at Rachel, is advanced. A seamless, disturbing fusion of miasma and hyper-advanced engineering, far beyond our current capabilities. But at this level, the ships are just delivery systems. It's the passengers that are the problem. The air in the room was thick enough to cut. The despair was palpable. We had just defeated a divine-level threat, a being who had pushed me to my absolute limit, forcing a breakthrough. We had thought, just for a day, that we had earned a moment of peace, a time to regroup. And now, the real war was arriving, led not by one, but by 2 divine-level threats, one of whom was ranked even higher than the foe we had just barely survived. And they were bringing an army of radiance that dwarfed our own fledgling numbers. I looked at the faces of my family. I saw the shock, the dawning fear, the crushing weight of the impossible odds stacking up against us. But I felt calm. My new gray divinity settled around me, cool and certain. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, unyielding resolve. The enemy had a name. They had a location. They had a trajectory. Alisara had been a complex, agonizing puzzle I had to solve. This was just a target. They are not prepared for us, I said, my voice cutting through the despair, drawing every eye. They don't know about Alisara's fall. They don't know about the 9 peak radiants standing in this room. And they certainly, I met Luna's gaze, then Rachel's, then all of theirs, don't know about me. I was not afraid. The path was clear. Let them come. The cold, sterile air of the Kagu Command Center was thick with a tension that was almost physical. Analysts, their faces pale and illuminated by the frantic glow of holographic displays, monitored cascading data streams that all screamed the same impossible truth. Officers from a dozen allied nations relayed clipped, professional orders, their voices tight with barely suppressed panic. On the central holographic display, the Aegis Luna, Earth's fragile orbital tripwire, had gone from a calm, steady green to a screaming, system-wide crimson, before dissolving into a blizzard of static. Its signal vanished utterly. They were here. All forces, final confirmation. Cecilia's voice, crisp and cold as steel, cut through the command center's rising panic. She stood not as Arthur's fiancée, but as the crown princess of the Slatemark Empire, a supreme commander in all but name, her peak radiant aura a tangible, stabilizing presence. Global command is green. Slatemark, Creighton, Kagu, and Avalon forces are in position at all designated pathways. Mount Hua sect confirms readiness, Seraphina added from her own console, her voice as cold and clear as the ice she commanded. Their interceptor formations are in place, awaiting the conduit. Alastair, coordinating from the Creighton Estate's war room, his face projected on a side screen, gave a grim, single nod. All pathways are stable and shielded. Arthur, the moment you open the primary conduits, the invasion begins. Godspeed, all of you. This was the plan, forged in the frantic, sleepless days since Arthur's discovery. It was not a desperate, last-minute defense of Earth's atmosphere. It was a preemptive, audacious, planet-wide counter-invasion. Arthur, with his new, terrifying, divine-level mastery of space, had spent the last several days pouring his power into the creation of massive, stable spatial pathways, interdimensional highways leading from Earth's primary military staging grounds directly to the cold, silent dust of the moon. This was not going to be a battle for Earth. It was going to be a battle on the moon, a shield against the apocalypse. Arthur looked at his team, his family, assembled in the Kagu courtyard, their forms tense, their power simmering. 9 peak radiance, the greatest concentration of mortal power in human history. Lucifer's crowns of light and shadow pulsed with a restless, impatient energy, his hands clenching and unclenching. Renkagu stood in perfect, meditative stillness, his eyes closed, his hands loose at his sides. Yet he seemed the most dangerous of them all. Serafina was a pillar of absolute zero, her aura a tangible cold. Rachel's eyes were already distant, her mind no doubt processing 1,000 tactical variables. Cecilia and Reka stood side by side, one a pillar of imperial command, the other a perfect blade in its sheath. Rose and Luna were the quiet center, Rose's life-affirming presence a stark, defiant contrast to the coming miasma, Luna's golden eyes already looking elsewhere, at the strands of imminent, chaotic fate. They were the tip of the spear. "Alice, Tiamat," Arthur said, his voice quiet, addressing his mother and the imposing draconic projection who stood as their rearguard. "You have the watch. Hold the home front." "Go," Alice said, her voice softer than usual but firm as steel. "Do not fail." Arthur turned to his team, his family. "With me." He did not open a small seam. He asserted his divine will. A massive, shimmering tear in reality, 20 meters wide and perfectly stable, opened in the courtyard. It was not a black void, but a perfect circular window. Through it, they could see the cold, silver-gray dust of the lunar surface, and hanging above it, like a breathtaking, vulnerable jewel, the blue-white marble of Earth. They stepped through as one. The transition was instantaneous, the pressurized air and sound of the Kagu Valley vanishing, replaced by the perfect, sterile, absolute silence of the vacuum. Their peak radiant and divine auras instinctively flared, projecting the necessary shields of pressure and life-sustaining atmosphere around them, a tiny bubble of defiant life in the utter cold. They stood on the pockmarked, ancient dust of the Sea of Tranquility, the powdery regolith finer than any sand, settling around their boots. And before them, blotting out the stars, filling their vision with a scene of geometric horror, hung the Demon Armada. It was not a fleet in any human sense, a collection of metal and engines. It was a living, breathing swarm of nightmares. 1,000 biomechanical ships, their hulls seemingly carved from the carapaces of colossal, diseased insects, pulsed with sickly purple and green lights. They wept a constant, oily film of raw miasma into the vacuum, a visible, cancerous taint against the pristine black of space. Myriad smaller vessels, the radiant rank Dukes, swarmed like hornets around a dozen massive, fortress-like capital ships. The sheer scale of it was staggering, a cloud of abject darkness poised to descend. Arthur's divine senses cut through the chaos, triaging the threat instantly. He felt the chaotic, violent static of the lesser ranks, the Dukes, a rabble of individual radiant-level powers. Above them, like heavy, solid anchors of pure malice, were the 4 archdukes, their power focused, arrogant, blazing like black suns, 2 at high radiant, 2 at peak radiant. And at the very heart of the fleet, on the bridge of a flagship that seemed carved from a single piece of solidified night, he felt the 2 true threats. They were not points of light in his perception. They were voids, black holes that seemed to be drinking the surrounding reality. Their divine signatures were immense, terrifying. Wrath, a singularity of pure, mindless, catastrophic rage. Envy, a cold, infinitely deep well of conceptual want, insidious, analytical, and already observing them, cataloging them. The demons had seen them. A ripple of chaotic energy passed through the fleet as it registered the impossible arrival of 10 beings on the moon's surface. "Now," Arthur said, his voice resonating not just in his team's minds, but across the vast, stable spatial pathways he had created, a command sent to a waiting world. As if a dam had broken, the space behind them tore open. From a dozen massive, stable portals, the armies of Earth began to pour forth. Sleek, obsidian Kagu void ships, bristling with an energy Arthur had never seen before, surged into the black. From another portal, the slate-mark battle legies emerged, thousands of mages in reinforced combat armor, riding intricate, glowing mana constructs. From a third, the polished, lethal forms of the Creighton Estate's automated warframes deployed in perfect, silent formations. And from the largest portals, the combined radiant divisions of Avalon and the allied nations, a true tidal wave of human defiance, flooded onto the lunar surface in a planned, overwhelming, coordinated invasion. The demon fleet, clearly stunned by this instantaneous, massive counter-deployment, reacted with chaotic, furious energy, their smaller vessels turning to meet the impossible charge. 9, Arthur commanded, his voice a calm, sharp point of certainty in the rising din of the deploying army. The army is yours. The archdukes, the dukes, the fleet itself, do not let a single one touch earth. Show them what 2 years of training has forged. Show them what peak radiant truly means when it works as one. He turned his gaze from the erupting, silent battle and fixed it on the 2 divine signatures, separated from him by kilometers of vacuum and a wall of lesser demons. Them, he said simply, are mine. He took a single step forward, his new divine power thrumming, his will focused. He intended to close the vast distance, to take the fight directly to their flagship, to end this before it could truly begin. Arthur moved. He was a gray blur against the silver, pockmarked dust of the lunar surface, accelerating with a smooth, unnatural grace. His new, divine rank power made the act of traversing kilometers in the low-gravity, airless environment as simple as walking across a room. Around him, high in the black, star-dusted void, the nascent battle was already erupting, a chaotic, silent pandemonium. The human counter-invasion force, a tidal wave of ships, mages, and high-tech warframes, poured from the massive gray seams he had torn in reality. They clashed immediately with the swarming demon fleet, a horrifyingly vast armada of biomechanical, miasma-weeping vessels. Blinding flashes of light, lance fire, magical explosions, the catastrophic detonation of lesser ships, began to paint the darkness, a silent, desperate fireworks show over the vulnerable, beautiful earth hanging in the sky. His 9 companions, a constellation of peak radiant power, had already engaged, moving as a single, terrifyingly cohesive unit. Lucifer, a blazing comet of light and shadow, and Rinkagu, a phantom of impossible, serene motion, spearheaded the assault, aimed directly at the enemy's command structure. His fiancés followed, a perfectly synchronized formation, weaving a net of combined power designed to dismantle, not just defeat. Arthur's focus was singular. He ignored the lesser dukes, bypassed the swirling dogfights. His gaze, amplified by his divine perception, was fixed on the 2 black holes of power at the heart of the enemy fleet. The flagship, where envy and wrath awaited, arrogant and untouched. He was the tip of the spear, and his purpose was to decapitate the enemy's divine leadership. He was intercepted. The primary peak radiant archduke, the massive, 4-armed creature of black-green carapace, had anticipated his move. It saw the singular, overwhelming power of Arthur's divine signature and knew instantly that this was the true threat. Bypassing the larger battle unfolding against the human armies, it used its own powerful, if cruder, spatial manipulation, tearing a jagged rift in the vacuum to appear directly in Arthur's path. It materialized with a pulse of pure, arrogant malice, a mountain of armored flesh and miasma, its 4 burning, intelligent eyes fixed on the single, humanoid figure approaching. It was the Vanguard's field commander, a being whose power had crushed worlds, and it intended to snuff out this unexpected, insolent light personally. Insolent mortal. Its voice echoed in Arthur's mind, a grating telepathic sneer vibrating with contempt and overwhelming power. Your insignificant light is the first to be extinguished. To dare gaze upon a lord, you must first prostrate yourself before me, their champion. It lunged. It didn't wait for a reply. Its movement was a blur, closing the remaining distance instantly. All 4 of its massive arms, each thick as a mature tree, pulled back before striking in a complex, simultaneous, devastating combination. It was a perfect peak radiant-level attack, designed to overwhelm any defense. One fist, wreathed in corrosive, unraveling miasma. A second, vibrating with pure, unadulterated kinetic force, shattering the very space before it. A third, trailing tendrils of entropic shadow that seemed to unmake the light they passed through. And a fourth, glowing with a soul-chilling ice, a conceptual cold that sought to freeze not just matter, but energy itself. The combined attack formed a perfect, inescapable cage of annihilation, a testament to the Archduke's own mastery and power. Arthur did not stop. He did not slow. He did not raise a hand to shield himself. He simply pointed his index finger at the charging behemoth as he continued to glide forward. There was no flare of mana, no gathering of energy. It was not a spell. It was not a beam of light. It was a simple, quiet, divine assertion. An edict written with the absolute, objective ink of his gray divinity. He looked at the charging, monstrous being, at the perfect, complex storm of its attack, and he passed a conceptual judgment. You are flawed. He did not target the creature's body, its armor, or its limbs. That would be a contest of power, a waste of energy. He targeted the conceptual seam he perceived with his new, divine senses, the fragile, unstable connection between the Archduke's chaotic, miasmic energy and the physical, biological form it inhabited. He didn't even use his full power, just a focused surgical mote of his will. A minuscule, almost invisible speck of pure gray light, no larger than a grain of sand, shot from his fingertip. It was not fast. It did not travel in any conventional sense. It simply arrived, crossing the kilometers of space instantly, its existence asserted by his will. The Archduke, in its towering arrogance, saw the tiny, insignificant speck of light. It was less than a firefly, a meaningless mote in the face of its world-ending assault. It didn't even register as a threat. It didn't bother to dodge, its four-pronged attack roaring forward, milliseconds from impact. The mote of gray light touched the dead center of the Archduke's massive chest, right on its thickest, most formidable carapace. It did not explode. It did not penetrate. It did not burn. It simply rested there for a single, infinitesimal, horrifying moment. And then the Archduke stopped. Its four-armed, catastrophic attack froze, meters from Arthur's calm, impassive face. Its arrogant, sneering expression contorted, its four burning eyes widening in unison, reflecting a sudden, profound, uncomprehending terror. It tried to move to complete the strike, but its body no longer obeyed. It looked down at its own chest. Where the mote of gray light had touched, a small, clean circle of nothing had appeared, no larger than a silver coin. And from that single point of contact, the gray conceptual energy, the assertion of objective truth and fundamental law, spread outwards like a virus of pure, unadulterated reality. Cracks, glowing not with light, but with pure negation, spiderwebbed across its formidable carapace. It wasn't just the armor that was breaking. The miasmic energy within it, the very source of its power, was being unwritten, its chaotic, unholy structure collapsing under the weight of objective law. The connection Arthur had targeted, the seam between energy and flesh, had been severed. The Archduke opened its mouth, but its telepathic sneer was replaced by a silent, psychic scream, a sound of pure, agonizing, existential pain. It felt its own power turning against it, its internal structures failing, the very bonds holding its monstrous form together dissolving, unmaking. A huge chunk of its shoulder and one of its four massive, attacking arms, its energy source conceptually severed, simply crumbled into a cloud of inert, floating dust and shattered, powerless fragments of armor. A profound, absolute psychic silence fell over the entire demon fleet. The swarming dukes, the other three archdukes who had been moving to engage Arthur's companions, all faltered, their chaotic assault momentarily stopping. They had just witnessed their strongest champion, a pinnacle of peak radiant power, a being who had conquered worlds, be not just defeated, but unmade and forced to flee by a single, casual, incomprehensible gesture from the enemy commander. From the bridge of the flagship, the two divine signatures, who had been content to observe, flared with sudden, immense power, their arrogance finally shaken. The cold, insidious presence of envy erupted with a sharp, calculating, almost hungry interest, his analytical gaze boring into Arthur, attempting to dissect the power he had just used. The raging bonfire of wrath pulsed with a new, focused fury, its mindless rage, which had been aimed at the planet, now contracting, focusing entirely on the single gray figure who had just humiliated its forces. They would not wait for Arthur to come to them. Their champion had failed. The true gods were stepping onto the battlefield. The battlefield, for a radius of hundreds of kilometers, fell still. The human armies, still pouring from the gray seams, paused. The demon fleet, frozen by the display of divine power, held its position. The war of mortals was momentarily suspended, all attention locked on the three figures who now defined reality. A wave of catastrophic, physical heat washed over the lunar surface, the regolith beneath Arthur's feet instantly superheating, threatening to turn to molten glass. A massive Mizsha pen thing, a mountain of raw, magma-veined rock held together by pulsing veins of pure, burning miasma, materialized on the plain before him, its impact sending a shockwave of molten dust kilometers into the airless void. Its form was barely humanoid, a crude approximation of a bipedal shape, but it radiated a mindless, overwhelming, catastrophic rage. This was Wrath, the third strongest. Its roar was a psychic scream of pure, uncomplicated fury at the being who had just humiliated its forces. And beside it, materializing not with a crash, but with a cold, insidious unfolding of shadows, stood the other, Envy. He was slender, almost elegant, a shadowy, robed figure whose features were completely obscured by a shifting veil of miasma that seemed to drink the starlight. His cold, analytical presence was a perfect counterpoint to Wrath's fire. He didn't radiate power. He absorbed it, his aura a creeping void of conceptual want. His chilling, intelligent gaze fixed on Arthur, analyzing, cataloging, coveting the gray divinity that had just unmade his archduke. Two of the universe's most powerful beings stood before Arthur. The first and third of the seven lords. A 2v1. A divine-level pincer. Good, Arthur thought. His own gray divinity settling around him like a shroud of quiet, cold truth. They're focused on me. He glanced back, just once, at the distant, glittering cloud of the human armada and his own 9 champions. Lucifer, Ren, Cecilia. The army is yours. Do not let them interfere. Do not let anything past you. Hold the line. He received 9 distinct mental affirmations, 9 surges of peak radiant resolve. Their battle, the larger war for the moon, now resumed with a vengeance. A chaotic storm of light and shadow erupting far behind him. His focus narrowed. The 2v1 had begun. Wrath, mindless and direct, attacked first. It didn't use a weapon. It didn't weave a spell. It simply roared, a psychic scream of pure, concentrated rage, and punched. Its massive, mountain-sized fist, wreathed in miasmic magma, tore through the vacuum at speeds that warped space, aimed at simply erasing Arthur from existence. The sheer force of its passage superheated the lunar dust in its wake into a trail of glass.
Arthur met IT.
His new divinity, his gray divinity, was not just about negation. It was about the assertion of objective truth. He held up his hand, his form impossibly small against the oncoming avalanche of divine power. He did not create a shield. He did not try to match its force. He activated sword sovereignty, his divine-level understanding of the blade, and performed a silent cut. But this was no longer a mere spatial severance. It was a divine edict, written with Mythweaver, fueled by Gray. He looked at the oncoming attack, and he severed the conceptual link between Wrath's base, mindless intent, and the physical manifestation of his fist. The massive, magma-wreathed fist, an instant before it would have obliterated him and shattered the lunar crust for 1,000 miles, simply stopped. It froze in the void, inches from his calm, outstretched hand. It hung there, disconnected, its own chaotic energy no longer guided by the demon lord's will. Wrath roared in animalistic confusion, his physical arm still extended, but its attack conceptually severed, orphaned. The fist, containing the power of a supernova, began to tear itself apart, its own unstable energy, no longer governed, consuming it from within. It imploded, then exploded in a silent, blinding flash of pure, uncontrolled miasmic fire. It was a clean, perfect, divine-level counter, and it failed utterly. Just as his divine edict of severance struck, Envy moved. The slender, shadowy figure, who had been watching with cold, analytical interest, didn't attack Arthur. He didn't block the cut. He simply extended a shadowy, insubstantial hand and, with a subtle, insidious gesture, his conceptual power lashed out. He envied the conceptual link Arthur had just established with his own attack. His power, a form of insidious parasitical theft or misdirection, latched onto Arthur's edict and corrupted it. Arthur's silent cut, instead of cleanly, perfectly severing Wrath's attack, was suddenly, horrifyingly redirected in the last nanosecond. It missed its conceptual target, Wrath's intent, and instead, his own divine edict sliced through the empty space to his left, unmaking a small lunar mountain range 5 kilometers away in a silent, instantaneous flash of gray light. Wrath's fist, no longer conceptually severed, continued its path, its full catastrophic force undiminished. Arthur's eyes widened. He didn't block me. He hijacked my attack. He had no time to attack again. He had no time to process. He was forced to use a full, desperate gray spatial fold, tearing himself from reality an instant before the fist connected, the sheer, blazing heat of its passage searing the edges of his disappearing form, the miasma corroding the very edges of the seam. He reappeared a kilometer away, his heart pounding in his chest, a new, cold, terrifying understanding dawning. This was not a 2v1. This was a force and scalpel operation. Wrath was the mindless, overwhelming force, the wrecking ball. Envy was the scalpel, the impossibly sharp, intelligent, cunning mind directing that force, analyzing his every move, and possessing the unique, horrifying ability to turn his own divine power against him. Interesting. Envy's telepathic voice whispered across the void, cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was not a taunt. It was a simple observation, the sound of a scientist who had just confirmed a hypothesis. His power is rooted in objective assertion, can be redirected. How fascinating. Wrath, his attack having missed, roared again, already turning, its mindless fury now refocused on Arthur's new position, ready to strike again on Envy's unseen command. Arthur was on the back foot, profoundly, dangerously so. He had just survived the opening salvo, and he had already learned that his strongest defensive abilities were now potential liabilities. Behind them, the dozen massive gray seams I held open disgorged the full, combined might of Earth's armies. The Kagu void ships, sleek, obsidian, and bristling with energy, surged into the black. Slate-mark battle legies, entire formations of mages on glowing, rune-scribed constructs, deployed in perfect, disciplined arrays. Kraton warframes, gleaming silver and blue, unfolded from their transit configurations, their automated targeting systems already acquiring thousands of targets. The sheer, overwhelming, unified human counter-invasion, a force that had been planned in desperate, frantic days, now met the demon fleet in a head-on collision. The silent vacuum of space became a canvas of unimaginable, silent violence. Explosions, blinding and catastrophic, bloomed like new stars. Lances of pure mana clashed with bolts of corrosive miasma. Ships tore apart, metal and biomechanical flesh mixing in expanding clouds of debris. The battle was joined, but this was a battle of armies. The true contest, the one that would decide the fate of this war, was the battle of champions. Cecilia's voice, crisp and cold as steel, cut across the 8-peak Radiance private psychic link, her mind instantly processing the battlefield, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic enemy formation. Triage. Lucifer, Ren, the 2-peak Radiant Archdukes are your priority. They are the primary command and control nodes. Decapitate them. We will handle the rest. Finally, Lucifer's voice was a predatory grin, his form already blazing, a binary star of perfect, balanced light and devouring shadow. I was getting tired of the opening act. I'll take the big ugly one. He veered off, accelerating at speeds that warped space, a comet of white light and black shadow streaking towards the larger of the two peak archdukes. A massive, four-armed brute wreathed in miasmic-fueled lightning, a being that radiated pure, uncomplicated physical might. Renkagu did not reply. He simply vanished. His objective was the second peak archduke, a more slender, cunning-looking male who radiated an aura of insidious miasmic sorcery. His skeletal hands already weaving a complex, multi-layered curse designed to cripple the advancing human fleet. Ren's form reappeared instantly, bypassing thousands of kilometers and the swarming Duke-class ships, positioning himself directly on the sorcerer's flank. His expression as serene as a placid lake, his god's eyes already mapping his every energy flow. As their two vanguards rocketed towards their targets, the remaining 6, my fiancés, moved as one. Their 2 years of brutal, relentless synchronization training had forged them into a single, terrifyingly cohesive weapon. They formed a perfect, 6-pointed star formation Aegis, a living engine of harmonized peak radiant power. Rachel Luna, threat analysis and designation. Cecilia commanded, her own imperial fire blazing around her, forming a protective, incandescent shield as she took the central command position. Serafina, Rose, area control. Deny their movements, cleanse their miasma. Reika, you are the spear tip. On my mark, you will pierce whatever they put in front of us. This was the first true test of their new, combined might. The two remaining high radiant archdukes, seeing their peak counterparts engaged, roared a psychic command to the surrounding hundreds of radiant-ranked dukes. A tidal wave of demons, vampires, brutes, sorcerers, biomechanical monstrosities, surged towards the Aegis formation, a wall of chaotic energy and miasma meant to drown the 6 women in sheer, overwhelming numbers. Lucifer, meanwhile, closed the distance with his target. The 4-armed brute, a being of pure, arrogant strength, met his charge. This was no one-trick pony. He was a general of demon armies, a master of miasmic combat, a being who had earned his peak radiant status through the annihilation of worlds. His 4 burning eyes, filled with rage and contempt, fixed on the approaching speck of light and shadow. Insolent gnat! The Archduke roared telepathically, all 4 of his arms striking simultaneously in a complex, overlapping, perfectly coordinated barrage. It was a flawless multi-layered attack, designed to shatter any conceivable defense. His upper right arm unleashed a javelin of condensed, corrosive miasma, a conceptual attack designed to unravel magical defenses on contact. His upper left arm fired a kinetic force blast, a cannonball of pure, compressed space that shattered the vacuum in its path, powerful enough to destabilize a small planetoid. His lower right arm wove a defensive shield of crackling, chaotic miasmic lightning, designed to fry any attacker who got too close. And his lower left fist, clenched and massive as an asteroid, punched forward with enough raw, physical force to shatter a small moon. Lucifer laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed only in their minds. He didn't just dodge. He met the assault head-on, his body becoming a living singularity of opposing, perfectly balanced forces. His 2 years of training, of forcing his chaotic, contradictory nature into a perfect, harmonious whole, culminated in this single, impossible moment. His left side, shrouded in an absolute, devouring shadow, moved to intercept the kinetic blast and the lightning shield. The shadow, a void of pure entropy, consumed the kinetic force, unmaking its physical properties, swallowing its momentum as if it had never existed. It then flowed over the crackling lightning shield, smothering the chaotic energy, draining it, silencing its chaotic roar instantly. His right side, blazing with pure, celestial, sun-hot light, met the miasma spear and the physical punch. The divine light, an assertion of pure, holy creation, incinerated the miasma javelin, purifying its conceptual filth on contact, unraveling its corrosive nature. His light-wreathed fist, blazing with the fury of a newborn star, then met the Archduke's massive, charging, moon-shattering fist. The resulting explosion was a silent, blinding, catastrophic supernova. Light vaporized miasma, shadow consumed force, The clash of two peak radiant fists, one of pure chaotic might, the other of perfect balanced power, sent a ripple through space-time itself. When the flare died a second later, Lucifer hovered, untouched, his clothes immaculate, his twin crowns spinning with a manic, joyous energy. The Archduke, however, was reeling. His two lower arms, the ones that had met Lucifer's attack, were gone, disintegrated to the elbow by the violent, unbalanced clash of forces. His own power turned against him. His miasma spear had vanished. His kinetic punch had been eaten by the void. His lightning shield had been snuffed out. He stared at his ruined, smoking limbs, his mind, built on the simple principle of overwhelming force, unable to process the instantaneous, total invalidation of his combined, perfect peak radiant assault. How? You're all rage and no harmony, big guy. Lucifer's voice, now cold and utterly devoid of humor, echoed in his mind. You throw 4 different kinds of power, but they don't work together. They just attack at the same time. Lucifer raised his hand. Light and shadow flowed, coiling around his arm, weaving together not in a chaotic clash, but in a perfect, harmonious helix, a sort of pure, unadulterated, balanced destruction. My power is one, he declared, his voice a judgment. Let me show you what real balance looks like. The Archduke roared, a sound of pure, abject rage and dawning, primal fear. He brought his 2 remaining, ravaged upper arms together, gathering all his remaining power for a single, desperate, defensive blast of miasmic fire. But Lucifer was already in motion. His attack wasn't just fast. It was conceptually perfect. The Archduke was powerful, a true peak radiant, a master of destruction. But he was facing an anomaly, a being who embodied the impossible, perfect balance of creation and annihilation. This fight was not a simple brawl. It was a conceptual execution. And Lucifer was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. He lunged, his sword of light and shadow aimed directly at the demon's core, the battle already decided. While Lucifer's duel was a symphony of explosive, overwhelming, and perfectly balanced force. A silent, binary supernova of light and shadow. Rinkagu's confrontation began with an entirely different, more unsettling quality. It began with absolute, serene silence. As Lucifer veered off to engage the 4-armed brute, Rinkagu had simply vanished from the accelerating formation. His objective was the second peak radiant Archduke, a male demon whose reputation, even in the fragmented intel provided by the Great Seven, was one of insidious cunning and profound conceptual sorcery. This demon, slender and robed in tattered, shadow-like fabrics that seemed to drink the starlight, floated amidst a cohort of lesser dukes. His long, skeletal hands already weaving complex, multi-layered patterns in the void. He radiated not the raw, chaotic power of his brutish counterpart, but a cold, meticulous, and deeply intelligent malice, the aura of a grandmaster of the dark arts. Ren's form reappeared instantly, bypassing thousands of kilometers and the entire swarming screen of Duke-class ships. He didn't use a spatial tear. His mastery of fist accord allowed him to simply cease existing at one coordinate and begin existing at another, a transition so seamless it left no ripple. He positioned himself directly on the sorcerer's flank, hovering in the vacuum, his expression as serene as a placid lake at dawn. The sorcerer Archduke, deep in the intricate process of casting a devastating, fleet-wide curse, shrieked telepathically in pure surprise. Ren's instantaneous arrival, bypassing wards, sensor nets, and physical guards, was a tactical impossibility. The complex, multi-layered spell he was weaving faltered for a fraction of a second, its energy fluctuating wildly. This Archduke, a being who had unmade civilizations with a thought, was a master of his craft. He instantly aborted the fleet-level curse, absorbing the painful backlash without flinching, and refocused his entire, furious attention on the single, silent threat that had appeared at his side. He recognized Ren as a peak radiant-level threat, and he immediately forewent crude, physical attacks. He unleashed his most potent and feared weapon, his personal domain of destruction, the curse of miasmic reality. It was not a beam nor a projectile. It was a conceptual-level assault that rewrote the laws of the immediate battlefield. The very fabric of space around Ren began to rot. The perfect, crystalline blackness of the void corrugated, warping and blistering as if reality itself were a sheet of burning film. Corrosive, soul-eating energy, a sickly greenish-purple, bled from unseen wounds in the vacuum. Debilitating, hyper-realistic illusions flickered at the edges of Ren's perception. Dying stars imploding, screaming faces of forgotten races consumed by miasma, the cold, accusatory eyes of his own Kagu ancestors. Simultaneously, the laws of physics became hostile, arbitrary suggestions. Localized gravitational currents, stronger than a black hole's edge, shifted violently, attempting to pull Ren into swirling miasmic vortexes that had just opened, vortices designed to shred both body and soul on a conceptual level. Waves of temporal distortion washed over him, attempting to rapidly age his physical form into dust or, conversely, slow his perception to a helpless crawl, trapping him in a single, agonizing moment. It was a spell designed to cripple entire fleets by turning their crews mad, to unmake armies by dissolving their very will to fight. This power had earned the Archduke his high station, and he unleashed it all, intending to annihilate this impudent, silent foe in a single, overwhelming move. Renkagu stood in the very center of this unfolding, reality-distorting catastrophe. He remained perfectly still. His expression was utterly serene. His god's eyes, however, were wide, not with fear, but with a look of profound, almost detached, analytical concentration. He did not see the terrifying, chaotic illusions of screaming faces or dying stars. He did not feel the disorienting pull of the false gravity. To his perception, the entire complex, world-ending spell was laid bare, not as a storm, but as a flawed, underlying mathematical structure. He saw the code of the curse. He saw the conceptual anchor points where the sorcerer had clumsily tied his spell to the fabric of space-time, leaving visible, jagged seams. He saw the inefficient energy pathways, the immense power wasted on redundant, emotionally charged illusory projections that had no true physical component. He saw the flawed logic in the gravitational equations, chaotic and unbalanced, creating destabilizing feedback loops that the sorcerer himself was constantly fighting to control. He analyzed the entire complex structure in the span of a single nanosecond. His internal assessment was cold and precise, impressive in scale, but inefficient. Tries to do too many things at once, a chaotic mess of overlapping concepts. It pulls on reality with brute force instead of agreeing with it. It is filled with contradictions. It is fundamentally flawed. He didn't erect a shield. He didn't attempt to negate the overwhelming power. He simply moved. His hands, which had been held loosely at his sides, rose slowly, gracefully, tracing impossible, flowing patterns in the silent vacuum. He was not casting a counterspell. He was not preparing an attack. He was engaging his core principle. His mastery of fist accord, his demigod-level understanding of space, time, and gravity was being brought to bear. The Archduke watched, his arrogance unwavering, as the Kagu warrior began what looked like a slow, meaningless, almost meditative martial arts form in the very heart of his inescapable, reality-ending curse. A vortex of corrupted gravity, powerful enough to crush a battleship, focused on Ren. He didn't resist it. His fingers wove a complex, spiraling pattern, and his own innate gravity affinity, guided by fist accord, found that anomalous gravitational thread. He didn't cut it. He amplified it just slightly, catching the energy of the vortex and folding it back on its own source, like a high-pressure hose suddenly, expertly kinked. A spatial tear, a rift of corrosive miasma, ripped open in the space where he had been. But Ren was no longer there. His god's eyes had seen the initiation of the tear, the subtle gathering of conceptual energy before the physical manifestation, and his space affinity, with a subtle, almost dismissive gesture of his open palm, had redirected the vector of its formation, causing it to open harmlessly a kilometer to his left, where it consumed nothing but empty void. A wave of temporal distortion, designed to age his body 1,000 years in an instant, washed over him. Ren simply stood, unmoving, his own time affinity creating a small, perfect bubble of normalized temporal flow around his body. The wave of hostile time flowed around him, like water diverting perfectly around a smooth, unmoving stone, leaving him utterly, completely untouched. He was not fighting the curse. He was not overpowering it. He was harmonizing with it. He was becoming its conductor. With each graceful, seemingly unrelated movement, he was systematically identifying every flawed, chaotic thread of the Archduke's spell and gently, subtly, pushing it back towards its origin. He was using the sorcerer's own immense, undisciplined, chaotic power to tie it in knots, to turn its own strength against it. The sorcerer Archduke, who had been watching with arrogant, detached confidence, suddenly felt a horrifying, physical lurch in his own energy core. He felt his spell, his perfect, unassailable curse, the one that had unmade worlds, suddenly sputter. It clogged, thickened, and then, with dawning, impossible horror, he felt it begin to reverse. The miasmic energy, so meticulously woven into 1,000 different attack vectors, was now converging, accelerating, aimed with perfect, pinpoint precision directly back at him. The spatial distortions, designed to tear his enemies apart, were now folding inward, threatening to unmake his own wards, his own physical form. "You, what are you?" the Archduke screamed telepathically, his voice a high-flung shriek of pure, uncomprehending terror. He frantically tried to cut off the spell, to sever his connection to the out-of-control, self-consuming miasma. But it was too late. Ren's gentle, perfect, harmonious push had already sealed the catastrophic feedback loop, locking the spell onto its own caster. The Archduke's own power, amplified, inverted, and guided with the perfect, subtle, inescapable precision of Ren's fist accord, consumed him. The creature, a peak radiant master of conceptual magic, was unmade by his own, flawed creation. He imploded silently, his miasmic energy and the collapsing spatial distortions crushing him into a tiny, dense, powerless singularity of swirling shadow before he vanished from existence entirely. Rinkagu floated in the empty space where the sorcerer had been, his hands falling back to his sides, his breathing perfectly even, his task complete. In the far distance, he saw Lucifer deliver his final, decisive blow. The spear-like blade of light and shadow pierced the brute Archduke's chest, and the creature's form, already ravaged, was simultaneously incinerated by divine light and consumed by entropic shadow, its existence extinguished from both ends. Two peak radiant archdukes, the two primary commanders of the demon fleet, eliminated in less than a minute. The vanguard fight was over. Lucifer and Ren turned their gazes, as one, sweeping over the main battlefield, where the six fiancés, their aegis formation a blazing, six-pointed star, were just beginning to engage the main horde. The instantaneous, conceptual eliminations of the two peak radiant archdukes sent a final, catastrophic shockwave of terror through the remaining demon fleet. Their command structure was not just broken. It was annihilated. Their strongest champions, beings who had commanded legions and conquered worlds, had been dispatched in under a minute with contemptuous, overwhelming ease. The remaining army of radiant rank dukes, a force that would have been sufficient to lay waste to the entire planet just 2 years ago, completely broke. Their formations shattered. What was once a tidal wave of miasmic fury, led by the two remaining high radiant archdukes, devolved into a panicked, chaotic scramble of individual demons, vampires, and corrupted beasts. Their only thought was to flee, to tear open unstable portals back to whatever dark realm had spawned them, to get away from the 8 terrifying points of light that had just unmade their masters. This was precisely the scenario Cecilia had anticipated. The strategic elimination of the commanders was Phase 1. The cleanup of the routed, terrified horde was Phase 2. "They're broken," Cecilia's voice announced over the comms, her tone cold, satisfied, and utterly relentless. "No more coordinated tactics. They are now just a mob. Rachel, Luna, shift to anti-fleet targeting." Prioritize capital ships and any energy signatures attempting warp portal formation. Rose, Seraphina, full spectrum area denial. Box them in. Do not let a single one escape. Reika, with me. We are the spear tip. We will cull the high radiance. The six-pointed Aegis formation, which had been holding a defensive posture, shifted instantly. It didn't just move. It unfurled like a terrifying, six-petaled flower of pure, synchronized destruction. Rachel's mind, a true supercomputer amplified by peak radiant power, processed the entire chaotic battlefield in a single instant. She was not just calculating trajectories. She was identifying the types of radiant rank dukes swarming in panic, categorizing their miasmic signatures, their energy outputs, their shield frequencies, their armor compositions. 73 miasmicasters, Vector 090, attempting a coordinated defensive spell. 112 vampire-class radiants, flanking maneuver, starboard, trying to use the debris field as cover. 2 high archdukes, brutes, ignoring the route and leading a final, desperate charge directly at our position. They are tactically inept. Understood, Luna replied, her voice a calm, melodic counterpoint to Rachel's rapid-fire data stream. The caster's shielding is based on chaotic harmonics, vulnerable to a precise, opposing resonant frequency. The vampire's link to their miasmic source is fragile, desperate. I see the threads. I can disrupt their collective stealth. Execute, Cecilia commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. Seraphina and Rose acted as one, unleashing the full, terrifying potential of their opposing elements, now perfectly harmonized by 2 years of relentless, synchronized training. Seraphina didn't just create a wall of ice. She extended her hand and projected a massive, expanding dome of absolute zero. It was not a physical barrier, it was a conceptual field. The vacuum of space in a 100-kilometer radius around their formation grew colder, the very chaotic motion of the miasmic energy particles slowing, grinding to a halt. The miasmicasters, their desperate, combined spell fueled by that chaotic energy, found their magic sputtering, freezing, dying in their hands, the conceptual cold extinguishing their power at the source. Rose, in perfect, beautiful counterpoint, unleashed a torrent of pure, weaponized life. Not healing, but a vibrant, corrosive, golden-green light that specifically targeted the necrotic miasma animating the demon ships and the vampire-class radiance. Where Seraphina's cold stopped them, Rose's light unmade them. Vampires, touched by the raw, holy energy of pure vitality, dissolved into screaming, silent ash. Their undead forms incapable of coexisting with such a potent, opposing concept. Biomechanical ships, their hulls woven with miasma and corrupted flesh, rotted in the vacuum, their armor flaking away, their energy systems shorting out as pure life overloaded their necrotic cores. It was a breathtaking, horrifying display of absolute area denial. The swarming horde of dukes was decimated. Their charge slowed to a frozen, rotting crawl, their formations dissolving into panicked, isolated pockets of survivors. Into this chaos, Cecilia and Reika moved. They were the spear tip of the plan, the executioners, targeting the 2 remaining high-radiant archdukes who were still attempting to bull-rush their way through the frost and light-filled kill zone. Their miasmic shields flaring, their eyes burning with a suicidal last stand. "First target is mine," Cecilia said, her voice blazing with imperial authority. She didn't launch a simple fireball. She gathered her peak radiant power, fueled by her absolute, regal will, and unleashed a high-level spell, one that spoke of her slate-mark lineage. Imperial Edict, Sun's Judgment. A miniature, blazing sun, condensed to the size of a small building, its core white-hot with purified magical fire, materialized directly in the path of the first High Archduke. The demon roared, raising his massive, shield-like arms, his own miasmic aura flaring to meet the challenge. The sun detonated. It was not a simple explosion. It was a sustained, silent release of pure, purifying heat and concussive force that lasted for 3 full seconds. The Archduke's miasmic shields, already weakened and made brittle by Seraphina's conceptual cold, vaporized instantly. The creature himself was caught in the heart of a star, his miasmic body incinerated, his soul extinguished in a flash of blinding, cleansing light. The second High Archduke, seeing his counterpart destroyed, faltered, his charge wavering, his eyes wide with terror. It was all the opening Reka needed. She moved, a gray-silver line of pure, focused intent. Her speed was so great she seemed to simply appear before the creature, a ghost in the void. Her blade, humming with the peak radiant power she had inherited from Magnus and perfected through her own relentless, obsessive discipline, was not a simple piece of metal. It was an assertion of finality. The Archduke, a being of immense physical power, swung his massive, clawed hand to swat her like a fly. Reka didn't meet the blow. She flowed under it, her form a graceful, impossible arc, her blade tracing a single economical, impossibly fast line across the creature's chest. It was a shallow cut, almost meaningless against such a monstrous, armored foe. The Archduke paused, confused by the negligible attack. Then he looked down. The cut wasn't bleeding miasma. It was bleeding nothing. A line of pure, gray negation, a conceptual wound, had been drawn across his core. From that line, the creature began to unravel. His miasmic energy simply dissipated. His physical form flaked away, not as ash, but as dust, his very existence unwritten by the perfect, final cut. Reka sheathed her sword as the creature dissolved into nothingness behind her. Her expression calm, her duty done. The final High Archduke dissolved into inert dust, its essence scattered by Reka's perfect, negating cut. A profound, psychic silence settled over the battlefield. Where moments before a massive, chaotic armada had thundered, there was now only a vast, silent graveyard of drifting, frozen wreckage, dissipating miasma, and crumbling, rotted biomechanical hulls. Lucifer and Renkagu, their own duels long since concluded, rejoined the 6 fiancés. The 8 of them hovered in the void, a silent, unassailable constellation of power. The war of mortals was over. It had not been a war, it had been an execution. It was a complete, overwhelming, crushing victory for the 8 peak radiants. Their 2 years of training, their bond, their combined power, it had not just been validated. It had been proven to be a force of nature, a terrifying, cohesive weapon that established their absolute dominance over any non-divine threat. The remaining, scattered pockets of the demon fleet, leaderless, their commanders gone, their army of radiant-level dukes utterly shattered, were now just cleanup. Their running, Lucifer's voice, filled with a cold, satisfied fury, crackled over the comms. Don't let a single one escape. Rachel, Luna, identify all portal attempts. Prioritize the capital ships. Cecilia's voice was relentless, leaving no room for mercy. Serafina, Rose, expand the denial field. Box them in. Reka, Ren, Lucifer hunting time. This was the final curb stomp. The 8 peak radiants, now unleashed and working in perfect, terrifying concert, became a systematic, merciless extermination squad. Lucifer was a blazing star of vengeance. He moved like a binary pulsar, his sword of light and shadow tearing capital ships in half with single, elegant strokes. He would appear above a cluster of fleeing dukes, his shadow pulling them into a condensed, gravitational vortex, and his light would then detonate in the center, purifying them all in a single, silent flash. Renkagu was a ghost. He simply appeared. In the path of a fleeing capital ship, he would materialize on its bridge, his expression serene. He would meet the terrified stares of the demon crew with a simple, open palm. His fist accord would touch the ship's miasmic core, and the core would simply stop, its energy unmade, leaving the ship a dead, cold hulk. The 6 fiancés were an engine. Rachel and Luna were the fire control, their minds linked. Warp signature detected. Coordinates November 7th, 92. Rachel would call out. Target confirmed. Luna would reply. Anchor point is vulnerable now. Cecilia would then act, her imperial fire lancing across the void as a condensed, pinpoint beam of solar fury, striking the ship's engines, crippling it instantly. Seraphina and Rose, their work of mass denial done, became hunter-killers, their fields of cold and life now projected as lances, freezing and dissolving fleeing dukes. Reika moved between them all, a gray-silver blur, her blade ensuring no high-priority target, no potential future commander, escaped the kill zone. Took less than 10 minutes. The entire armada was annihilated. The black sky, now clean of the invasive fleet, was theirs. The human fleet, which had just finished deploying from the gray seams, hung back, their crews watching in stunned, silent awe. They had come prepared for a desperate planet-scale war. They had just witnessed an execution, performed by 8 beings who operated on a level they could barely comprehend. Exhausted, their auras flickering but their spirits blazing with the fierce, cold light of triumph, the 8 of them finally came to a halt in the void. They hovered amidst a vast, silent, expanding graveyard of drifting wreckage and dissipating miasma. They had done it. They had held the line. Earth was safe. The triumphant mood vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, shared, heart-stopping dread. The adrenaline of their own overwhelming, impossibly fast victory evaporated, and the silence of the void was filled by a new, terrifying sound, the absence of Arthur's. "Rachel, analysis," Cecilia commanded, her voice suddenly tight, her gaze snapping down to the gray, pockmarked lunar surface far below. Rachel's hands, which had been steady, trembled slightly as she refocused her awareness, her analytical senses reaching down towards the Sea of Tranquility, where Arthur had engaged the 2 divine lords. The data that flowed back was chaotic, terrifying, and wrong. "The landscape is shattered," she reported, her voice thin. "Loose eggs of the crust are melted or refrozen. The ambient energy readings they're not just high, they're conceptually unstable. Reality itself is flickering." "Where is he?" Lucifer roared, his triumphant energy instantly replaced by white-hot, protective rage. "I see him," Luna whispered, her golden eyes wide with horror, her fate sense locking onto the scene. "Oh no!" The 8-peak radiance descended, a silent, desperate plummet, halting at a high altitude, afraid to approach, afraid to interfere. They saw it. Their private battle had been a symphony of overwhelming power. His was a silent, desperate, unwinnable struggle. Far below, in the center of a crater kilometers wide, Arthur lay in a broken heap, his gray divinity, once a quiet, absolute assertion, now a faint, flickering candle. His body was ravaged, his regeneration clearly struggling against a conceptual, divine-level damage that defied healing. Hovering above him, graceful and untouched, were the 2 demon lords. Wrath, the mindless colossus of magma and miasma, pulsed with rage, ready to deliver the final, killing blow. And beside him, Envy, the slender shadow of pure, cold intellect, held him back with a simple, raised hand, his analytical gaze fixed on the fallen god at his feet. They looked like victors, examining their prize before its final disposal. Arthur had failed. His first strategic gambit, his attempt to BFR Wrath, had been hijacked by Envy, turned against him, and the resulting backlash had shattered his defenses, leaving him broken and vulnerable. "Arthur!" Rachel screamed, her voice a raw sound of pure, telepathic terror. Lucifer, his eyes blazing with a grief-stricken, suicidal fury, surged forward. "I'm going." "No!" Luna and Ren shouted at the same time, their combined will grabbing him, holding him back. "You can't," Ren said, his voice grim, his god's eyes seeing the horrifying, conceptual truth of the scene below. "Their power, it is not just power. It is conceptual. It's a different reality. If we go down there, we are not reinforcements. We are hostages," Luna finished, her voice trembling, tears streaming down her face as she watched Arthur's flickering aura. "We are liabilities. He knew this. He can't fight them and protect us. We would be used against him just like Alisara tried to." The 8 most powerful mortal-level beings on the planet, fresh from a victory that had annihilated an entire demon army, a victory that had established their absolute supremacy, could do nothing but float helplessly, sickeningly in high orbit. They were forced to watch as their friend, their lover, their leader, lay broken and defeated at the feet of two gods, his divine light about to be extinguished. The lunar dust, kicked up by the catastrophic impact of my own hijacked power, hung suspended in the vacuum like a shroud of gray fog. I lay at the epicenter of the crater, the silence of space pressing against my ringing senses. My body was a wreck. The backlash of unmaking my own divine edict had ravaged my internal energy networks, burning through my channels like acid, and the physical impact against the moon's crust had shattered bone and pulped muscle. But I was divine, and my divinity was built on the foundation of objective truth. I am not broken, I asserted internally. It was not a wish. It was a command issued to my own physiology, enforced by the gray. The gray power within me surged, obedient to my will. Shattered femurs snapped back into alignment with sickening wet crunches that vibrated through my skeleton. Torn muscle fibers reknit, weaving themselves back together with accelerated supernatural speed. The chaotic, hijacked energy dissipating from my aura, the residue of envy's corruption, was purged, forced out of my system by the steady, cold hum of my own power. I stood up, dust cascading from my shoulders. High above the crater rim, two figures descended, silhouetted against the starry void. Wrath, a mountain of cooling magma and hate, landed first. The impact shook the moon's crust for miles, turning the crater floor beneath its massive feet into a sea of instant glass. Envy floated down behind him, his shadowy robes rippling in a non-existent wind. His presence a cold void that seemed to drink the starlight, darker than the shadow of the earth. Still functional, Envy observed telepathically, his voice dry, curious, and utterly devoid of concern. Your resilience is enviable. Most would have been unmade by their own ambition. I didn't waste breath on banter. I summoned Valeria. The sword materialized in my grip, not merely as steel, but as a solidified construct of gray divinity, humming with the potential to sever concepts, its edge blurring the space around it. Wrath didn't wait for a signal. It roared, a psychic blast of pure fury that rattled my mental defenses, and charged. For a creature the size of a building, it moved with terrifying speed, crossing the crater floor in a blur of heat and motion. A massive, magma-wreathed fist, hot enough to vaporize stone, aimed directly at my head. I stepped into the attack. I didn't block, I flowed. Using sword sovereignty, I read the trajectory of the force, the vector of the intent. I twisted my body, a micro-adjustment of spatial geometry, letting the fist pass within a millimeter of my nose. The heat seared my skin, instantly healed by my aura. As the behemoth passed, I slashed. It was a perfect countercut, a silent cut aimed at the back of Wrath's knee, designed to hamstring the Colossus and bring it down. My blade bit deep into the magma flesh, the gray energy severing the dense muscle and bone. But there was no resistance, no severing of tendon, no collapse. Envy, hovering 10 meters away, flicked a single slender finger. The wound on Wrath's leg didn't just heal, it transferred. A deep, agonizing gash opened spontaneously on my leg, mirroring the exact cut, depth, and location I had intended for Wrath. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, buckling my knee. He stole the injury, I realized, stumbling but keeping my footing through sheer will. He envied my health and swapped it for Wrath's damage. Wrath spun, its movement impossible, defying inertia. It swept a massive arm out, a backhand that covered the entire width of the crater, a wall of unstoppable kinetic force. I couldn't dodge this. The radius was too wide, my leg compromised. I couldn't parry it physically. The mass difference was absolute. Mythweaver, I commanded, my voice a rough growl. Edict, stone sovereign. I slammed my hand onto the lunar floor. The gray regolith erupted upwards, not as loose dust, but fusing instantly into a towering, diamond-hard wall of lunar bedrock, reinforced by my divine will. a shield the size of a skyscraper. Wrath's arm slammed into the wall. The impact was deafening, a silent vibration that rattled my teeth and threw me backward. The wall shattered, turning to dust instantly, but it absorbed the kinetic force, buying me a fraction of a second. I used the cover of the dust cloud. I folded space, appearing directly above Envy. If the scalpel was the problem, I would break the scalpel. If he stole effects, I would kill him before he could complete the transaction. I brought my sword down in a vertical arc, a silent cut powered by everything I had, aimed to bisect the shadowy lord from crown to crotch. Envy looked up. He didn't dodge. He didn't raise a shield. He simply looked at my sword with that bottomless, covetous hunger in his eyes. "That sharpness," he whispered, his voice caressing my mind. "I want it." My blade, mid-swing, suddenly turned dull. The conceptual edge, the thing that allowed it to cut reality, vanished. It became a blunt, heavy metal bar. It bounced harmlessly off Envy's shadow shield with a pathetic, ringing clang that vibrated up my arms. Simultaneously, Envy's own hand, wreathed in shadow, lashed out. It was impossibly sharp. He had stolen the concept of my cut and applied it to his own strike. I twisted violently, abandoning the attack, throwing myself backward through the air. But his fingers grazed my ribs. They shore through my divine defenses and my flesh like they weren't there, carving 3 deep, clean lines across my side, exposing bone. I kicked off his shield, putting distance between us, landing back on the crater floor. I was panting now. My leg was bleeding from my own attack. My side was bleeding from his stolen sharpness. My energy reserves were dipping. Wrath landed between us, shaking off the dust of my shattered wall. His rage building, the magma in his veins glowing brighter, hotter. I can't win a war of attrition. The thought was cold and clear. I damage Wrath, Envy transfers it. I use a technique, Envy steals its properties. I defend, Wrath shatters the defense. They were a perfect loop. Wrath provided the infinite pressure, the physical threat that forced me to act, to expend energy. Envy punished every action I took, turning my own strength into a liability, stealing my advantages. It was a closed system of destruction, and I was trapped inside it. Wrath charged again, a relentless engine of destruction, the ground melting beneath its feet. Envy watched from above, his cold eyes dissecting me, waiting for my next mistake, waiting to see what else he could take. I needed to break the loop. I couldn't overpower them. I couldn't outsmart Envy's theft directly. His reaction speed was instantaneous. I had to change the variables of the equation. I had to make the system eat itself. The lunar dust hung suspended in the vacuum, a gray fog of war illuminated by the starlight and the glow of the demon fleet burning in orbit. Through it, the burning eyes of Wrath approached like twin suns. He was charging again, a mindless, repetitive cycle of violence, a hammer that knew only how to strike. Behind him, Envy drifted like a vulture, patient, parasitic, and utterly confident. I tightened my grip on Valeria, forcing the conceptual edge back into the blade through sheer will. Envy could steal the property, but as long as I held the source, the gray divinity, I could reforge it. But reforging took energy, and I was bleeding energy with every second. He steals what I project, I analyzed, watching Wrath's thunderous approach. He envies the outcome of my actions, my cuts, my speed, my health. If I attacked Envy, Wrath would crush me while I was distracted. If I attacked Wrath, Envy would negate it or reflect it. The solution wasn't to stop attacking. It was to attack with something Envy couldn't steal. Or perhaps, something he wouldn't want to steal. Or better yet, something he couldn't control because it didn't belong to me. Wrath was upon me. He raised both fists for a hammer blow that would likely crack the moon's crust down to the mantle. I didn't dodge. I didn't block. I dropped my sword. Valeria vanished into a pocket dimension. I stepped forward, directly into the shadow of the descending colossus. It was suicide. It was madness. Arthur! I heard Rachel's psychic scream from orbit, faint and terrified, watching the feeds. I ignored it, I focused entirely on my third gift, soul resonance. Usually, I used it to connect, to understand, to copy. It was a bridge. But a bridge could handle two-way traffic. And a bridge could be used to dump poison into a well. As Wrath's fists descended, blotting out the sky, I extended my hands and slammed them against his burning, magma-rock chest. My gray aura flared, not to protect me from the heat, which was searing my palms instantly, but to force a connection. "Look at me!" I roared telepathically, driving my will into the chaotic, screaming storm of Wrath's mind. It was like sticking my head into a blast furnace. Pure, incoherent rage washed over me. There was no logic, no language, no strategy. Just a desire to burn, to break, to end. It was a primal scream that had lasted for eons. I didn't try to calm him. I didn't try to dominate him. His divine will was too thick, too heavy, too ancient. Instead, I used soul resonance to align. I vibrated my own soul to match the frequency of his rage. I became a mirror, and then I tilted the mirror. "Why do you hold back?" I whispered into the storm of his mind, my voice becoming his inner voice. "Why do you wait?" Wrath faltered. The hammer blow paused inches from my head, his muscles trembling, the magma veins pulsing erratically. The confusion I had sensed earlier returned, magnified by my resonance. "You are the storm," I projected, pushing the thought deep into his psyche, wrapping it in his own rage. "You are the end." But I shifted my focus, using the resonance to highlight Envy's presence behind us. Envy who was cold. Envy who was calculating. Envy who held the leash. He is the one who stops you. He steals your kill. He envies your strength. He thinks he is your master. It was a lie, and it was the truth. Envy did control him. Envy did use him. To a being of pure instinct, control felt like chains. "What are you doing?" Envy's voice cut in, sharp with sudden alarm. He sensed the shift, the foreign resonance pollution in his puppet. He lashed out, a tendril of shadow aiming to sever my connection, to reclaim his tool. But he was too slow. Or rather, he had misunderstood the target. He thought I was attacking Wrath. I wasn't. I was pointing a loaded gun. "Now!" I shouted, pouring every ounce of my remaining mental strength into one final, projected image. Envy, standing over Wrath's broken body, laughing, stealing his fire, mocking his strength. Wrath roared. It wasn't the battle cry he had used before. This was a sound of betrayal, of primal territorial fury, of a beast realizing the cage door was open and the keeper was within reach. The hammer blow didn't fall on me. Wrath spun, his massive body moving with a speed born of pure hatred. His colossal fist, wreathed in the fires of a dying star, swung around in a flat, devastating arc. Envy was rushing forward to intervene, to sever my connection. His attention focused entirely on me and the glitch in his puppet. He was completely exposed. He had expected me to dodge. He had expected me to attack. He had never, in eons of manipulation, expected his own shield to become the spear. "Wrath, cease!" Envy commanded, exerting his authority, his voice a lash of will. But an edict of authority means nothing to a natural disaster. Wrath's fist connected with Envy. There was no sound in the vacuum, but the impact sent a ripple through the lunar surface that threw me off my feet. Envy's shadow shield, hastily erected, shattered instantly. His slender, robed form was caught squarely by the mountain of magma. Envy's telepathic scream was a high, thin sound of shock and agony. He was launched backwards, skipping across the lunar surface like a stone across water, crashing through ridges and dunes, his aura flickering violently. The blow from his own peer, fueled by absolute rage, had shattered his defenses in a way my attacks never could. The synergy was broken. The loop was shattered. Wrath stood panting, confused, his rage vented but directionless, looking between me and the cloud of dust where Envy had landed. I didn't hesitate. I summoned Valeria back to my hand. The gray divinity surged, no longer fighting a war on two fronts. "Now," I whispered, the cold certainty of the kill settling over me. I folded space not to escape, but to hunt. I vanished, reappearing instantly above the dazed, broken form of Envy, who was struggling to rise from the debris, his robes torn, his shadowy form bleeding miasma. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with hate and fear. You turned him. I just showed him where to look, I said. I raised my sword. This time there was no wrath to guard him. This time there was no time to steal the cut. The war of gods had turned. I descended. Gravity, magnified by the sheer density of my new divine will, pulled me down like a falling star towards the broken form of the first demon lord. The lunar dust swirled around the impact crater of his body, a gray shroud for a dying king. Envy struggled in the regolith, his shadowy robes torn and dissipating like smoke in a gale, his miasmic aura flickering with the desperate, sputtering light of a candle refusing to be extinguished. He looked up as I approached, his eyes wide. They held no contrition, no acceptance of defeat. Instead, they burned with a frantic, consuming greed that even the proximity of death could not quell. "It is not fair," Envy hissed, his mental voice a scraping sound against my consciousness, like rusted metal on bone. You cheat. You turn my own tools against me. You weaponize my own nature. That power, that gray, it does not belong in this logic. It is outside the rules. It is mine. It should be mine. I landed before him, the impact silent in the vacuum but vibrating through the stone. I summoned Valeria. The sword materialized in my grip, not merely as steel, but as a solidified construct of gray divinity, its edge humming with a line of absolute severance waiting to be drawn. "It belongs to no one," I said, my voice cold, carrying the weight of objective truth. "It is simply the reality you refuse to acknowledge. You have spent your existence trafficking in lies and theft. Envy. You built a throne on borrowed strength. Now the debt is due." Envy snarled, his face twisting into a mask of pure, covetous hatred. He didn't beg for mercy. He didn't try to flee. He knew he couldn't outrun a spatial manipulator. Cornered, broken, stripped of his dignity, he did the only thing his parasitic nature allowed. He lunged, not with his physical body, which was ruined, but with his very soul. "Then I will take it all," he shrieked, a psychic scream that tore at the edges of my mind. He unleashed his ultimate authority, the concept that had made him the First Lord. It wasn't a spell or a martial technique. It was a conceptual inversion of his own existence. Divine usurpation. He didn't try to steal a specific attribute or deflect an attack this time. He turned his entire being into a metaphysical void, a hungry, swirling singularity aimed directly at the core of my gray divinity. He sought to swap our existences, to overwrite my soul with his own void, dragging my power, my body, my very identity into him, and discarding my consciousness into the empty, dying shell of his own form. It was a terrifying, suicidal gambit, born of absolute desperation. I felt a sudden, sickening lurch in my gut, a sensation of being pulled inside out. My gray aura flickered, drawn towards him like smoke into a high-powered vacuum. The edges of my vision blurred, superimposing with his perspective. I saw myself standing there, sword raised, through his greedy, hateful eyes. I felt his hunger, his hollow need to fill the emptiness inside him with my strength. He was winning. For a microsecond, the sheer, desperate weight of his envy, honed over eons, was stronger than my weary resolve. He was hollowing me out, pulling the gray right out of my core. No, I thought, the single quote a sharp anchor in the swirling chaos of the transfer. "You do not get it. You think this is just power? You think this is just another trophy to hang on your wall? You cannot steal what you cannot comprehend." I didn't pull back. I didn't fight the suction. I pushed. I opened the floodgates of my soul. I let him have it. I poured the essence of the gray, the cold, objective, unfeeling truth of the void outside the Akashic records, the weight of a reality that existed without narrative or desire, directly into his grasping conceptual maw. Envy's eyes widened in triumph as the power flooded him, then instantly bulged in horror. He had wanted the power. He had wanted the authority. He hadn't understood that the gray wasn't just energy. It was a burden. It was the weight of absolute reality, stripped of fantasy, stripped of desire, stripped of the very want that defined his entire existence. It was the concept of is, forced into a creature made entirely of want. It was poison to a creature made of desire. It filled his void with something that could not be consumed, only acknowledged. Too heavy, Envy gasped, his mental voice fracturing. His shadowy form began to bloat and crack, light spilling from the fissures. Not golden divine light, nor miasmic purple, but a dull, erasing gray. It doesn't care. It doesn't want, make it stop. It just is, I whispered. I stepped forward, the connection between us now a solid bar of conceptual agony for him. I raised Valeria. I didn't need a fancy technique. I didn't need a grand edict. I just needed to finish what he had started, to sever the link before his dissolution dragged me down with him. Myth Weaver, I murmured, the word resonating with my new authority. Edict, null. I drove the sword down. It didn't cut him in the physical sense. The blade passed through his shadowy form as if he were smoke. But where the blade passed, the gray took hold. It unmade the concept of his envy. It erased the hook of his desire. It asserted that the being known as the First Lord was no longer a valid component of reality. Envy didn't scream. He simply dissolved. One moment, a divine lord stood before me, a being who had terrorized galaxies and outwitted gods. The next, there was only a dispersing cloud of gray dust, erasing itself from the universe, leaving not even a memory of his ambition behind. The First Lord was gone, consumed by the very prize he had tried to steal. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. And then it was shattered. Behind me, a sound like the cracking of a planet's spine echoed through the vacuum, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Wrath. The Third Lord had stood frozen, confused by the sudden betrayal and the disappearance of his guiding intellect. He had been a storm without a direction. But now, sensing the final death of his counterpart, the only tether that had given his existence purpose and focus, his confusion coalesced into something far simpler and far more dangerous. Sorrow? No, demons did not mourn. It was pure, unadulterated, self-destructive annihilation. Without envy to direct the rage outward, the rage turned inward, seeking to consume everything in a final, glorious detontation. Wrath roared. The sound was a psychic shockwave that pulverized the rocks for miles around us, turning boulders into powder. His magma-veined body swelled, cracking open, revealing a core of blinding, white-hot energy that rivaled the sun. He wasn't trying to fight anymore. He was trying to detonate. He was turning himself into a divine bomb that would take the moon, and likely the earth behind it, into the grave with him. I turned, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of this new, catastrophic threat. One down. But the second one was about to end the game for everyone.